welcome to the new Bionomic Grower Workshop. My name is Ian Jones, and I'm going to be showing you some of the most powerful basic gardening skills that exist anywhere in the world. With the techniques that I'm going to show you, you will be able to grow as much as 600% more food in the same area with far less work and far less space used. Also, you'll be able to grow food that has far more vitamin content in it, as much as 600% or more again. And I don't have to tell you what that can do for your health. Well, just give me a chance to run over here and get my tools, and we'll get started. You know, every job goes smoother and easier when you have the right tools, and in this case we have the right tools right here. We are going to be using, for every single one of these skills that we're going to demonstrate for you, we're going to be using just basically 3 tools. The 2 most important ones I have right here, and that is a quality garden spade and quality garden fork. Now, you'll notice with this fork that this is not a pitchfork. This is a spading fork. It has much heavier tines than a pitchfork, and is specifically made for digging. And also, what we have is a spade, not a shovel, not the kind that has the pointed bottom. And as we get into the skill, you'll see why it's very important for us to have a good flat bottom spade like we have here. These are Rolls Royces of the trade. These are made by Clarendon Forge in England. The very best garden tools as far as spades and forks are made in England. There are some other less expensive tools that are also made to the same high quality standard now. I understand that you can even find them sometimes in Sam's and other places. But if you really want the best, the Clarendon Forge are the ones to look for. I want you to notice that we have taken a bastard file and we have put a good sharp edge on the back side of this spade. That is going to make every part of the digging operations that we're going to do with this spade go so much more easily. Okay, the very first skill that we're going to demonstrate for you is called skimming. You'll notice here on the ground that we've got a little bit of grass and weed cover. It's not too thick in this particular spot, but this skill that I'm going to show you works well enough so that you can skim even thick grass sod from a lawn, or even scrub and brush. And I've skimmed even brush and so on that was as much as almost as thick as my little finger kind of thing. Okay? What we're going to do now is, instead of getting down here and having to weed this all by hand or hoe it, we're going to clean it off much more quickly. The way we do it is we grab, if you're right-handed, you'll grab the cob of the handle. This is called the cob. This is a D handle, okay, because it's kind of shaped like a D. And you grab the cob with your right hand if you're right-handed, or if you're left-handed, you just reverse everything. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to grab the cob with my right hand, palm down, and I grab the shaft of the tool with my left hand, again, palm down, and hold the tool horizontally. I'm now going to bend my knees a little bit so that I can get down as close to the ground as possible. You can also do this skill working right down on your knees, which is, I find, very, very comfortable, especially if you have back pain or back trouble. But whatever works best for you, either the stooped position or a kneeling position works very well. And what you're going to do now is you're going to swing this spade, but you're not going to swing it with your arms straight so that the spade moves in a semicircular arc like this, because if you do that, you're going to take gouges of soil out of the ground, and we don't want to gouge the soil very deep. All we're going to do is just skim about the top 1/4 of an inch to maybe 1/2 inch at most. We want to keep it closer to probably as little as 1/4 of an inch of soil, and all of the grass and weeds we're going to skim right off of the top. And I'm going to tell you a little secret about this skill that I discovered only after several years of using this skill and putting gardens out and garden beds out into areas that had been full of weeds and weed seeds. And people would tell me, "Oh, Ian, you're crazy. You don't want to put a garden out there. It's going to be just all full of weeds." And after I had skimmed the ground and double dug my bed, I never had any weeds. And finally, one day I figured out that the reason was that when a piece of ground has been growing weeds for many, many, many years, all those weed seeds are falling right down on the surface, and they never get mixed down deep into the ground unless you've come along with one of those noisy tools called a rototiller, which I absolutely despise, and I'll tell you more later on why, and why you'd be better off to either sell it or just keep it for doing your paths or other non-growing areas. But anyway, as long as you've never rototilled, all those weed seeds are right in the surface. And so as we begin to skim and take that top layer of soil off, we're taking mostly all of the weed seeds off as well. And when we have a finished bed, weeds are almost non-existent completely. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to thrust the spade straight forward like this. Okay? This is how it goes. Okay, now that I've shown you how the basic technique works, I'm going to start out here in the path area of this bed and show you how quickly this can go. Okay, you notice as I'm just skimming off this topsoil and the weeds, I dig in and then turn it off to the side. That's really important. You don't want to be throwing it straight ahead in front of you on the area that you haven't skimmed yet, because then you have double work. Seems like a pretty obvious thing, but believe it or not, I didn't figure it out right away, and many of my students that I've taught these skills don't figure it out right away either. So it really works a lot better if you'll just skim, turn it off to the side. Skim, turn it off to the side, like that. Okay, you'll notice that I finished skimming all of the path areas. I always like to skim the paths first and the bed last. And the reason for that is basically it just works a little bit more logically, because as I'm skimming the pathways, I throw the skimmings off to the outside where they will then be raked up. We'll take them away, put them on our compost pile. On the compost, the weed seeds, as well as the grass and weeds and other organic material in there, break down into good, rich humus. That makes wonderful material that you can then either add back into your finished bed next year, or I also like to use it as my soil material that I'll mix in with my own custom-made potting soil that we'll put into our flats. We'll show you how to start your own seedlings and flats later on. But if you start by skimming the path areas first, then when we come along and skim the bed and throw those skimmings out into the already skimmed pathway, it is very, very easy to rake those skimmings up there from the pathway area. It just works really, really well. Okay, I've got just about half of the bed skimmed off. See how I throw it off there to the pathway? And now I'm going to turn around and work this one the other way so that I can be throwing this half out onto this path. Now, one of the things that I really should have mentioned at the beginning is that the first thing before you start any work on your ground, the first thing you really need to do is that you need to check the moisture of your soil. Soil moisture is the #1 most important thing to making the ground easy to work, and also assuring that you won't over pulverize the ground or damage it in other ways. Even the most heavy clay that gets like concrete when it's dry, when it has the right moisture content, it gets workable, and you can go through this entire digging process with very little more effort than if you were digging a better loam type of soil. Now, in a really, really bad situation, heavy, heavy clay, I've been in cases where you have to soak the ground for days and days and days until you know that you have got water to soak down a full 24 inches deep. It might mean soaking it several times through the day and covering the area up with plastic so that the hot summer sun won't evaporate the water out before it soaks down into the ground. Okay, we finished skimming the entire bed, and the next step, the next skill is that we're going to edge the entire bed all the way around with our spade. And we do that by placing one foot, whichever's more comfortable for you. For me, it's the right. We place that up onto the tread of the spade. You see there's a nice tread that's here so that it doesn't cut into the sole of your foot. And we're going to place the foot up there. And then I'm just going to lean my body weight onto the tool and use a rocking motion back and forth so that between the body weight and the rocking motion, the tool just cuts itself right down into the ground. All of the skills that I'm going to show you from this point on, I'm going to show you how not to kill yourself, how to let the tools do the work for you. The moisture being the right level makes this so much easier, but also this gentle rocking motion. Now you notice sometimes, especially since this ground is just a little bit on the sticky side, as I'm pulling out, it wants to pull a big clod of dirt from the pathway up, and I don't want that pathway to break up. So I'm going to step with my foot on it and wiggle the spade back and forth to pull it out. Okay? Moisture is making it hang on. Ooh, I've never had it hang on like that. We have finished edging all the way around, and you'll see why it was so important for us to do that edging now that we do our next skill, which is going to be with the fork. And now we're going to come along and we're going to loosen the top 12 inches of ground over the surface of the entire bed. And the way we do this, again, we're going to let the tool do the work. I push the tines in just an inch or two at most and use the leverage of the tool to bring it down like this. And you see, the first time, because we're so close to the edge, already just putting the tines in just a very shallow depth like this, already the ground is breaking up all the way clear to the edge of the bed. And if I go any deeper in, I am going to be loosening the path area too, and I do not want to do that. So that's all I'm going to do here in this first 6-inch swath of ground. Put it in an inch or two and break that up. Put it in about an inch or two, break it up. Move over, put it in just an inch or two, break it. Okay, now I'm going to come back about another 6 inches and again put it in just an inch or two, bring the leverage of the handle of the tool all the way down as far as possible. And you notice some people, when they're trying to do this, they're first learning, they can't get a very good breakup because they're pulling the tool straight back towards themselves and they don't get very much leverage. So what you want to do is make a habit of standing with your body slightly to one side like this, so that as you bring the tool down, you can bring it into one hand now and pull it all the way almost down to the ground. You see me bending so I get this full breakage. Now I'm going to put it in just another inch or two, and again, the full leverage. And you see how this just breaks right up now. And in just a little more, I break it all the way up. And now I sink it all the way down like that. Now I'm going to repeat it. And you'll notice now how I can move quite quickly and rhythmically. In, down, in, down, in, down. In, down, in, down, in, down. And because the leverage of the tool is doing the work, I'm putting virtually no effort into this at all. You do not have to pick this soil up and turn it to do anything. This is just a pre-loosening operation. Okay, I want you to notice something now as I am approaching this edge. At this point, I'm about a foot out from my string, and you don't want to ever bring your fork all the way up against the edge, up against your guide string, because the fork is always breaking up the soil at least a couple of inches out on either side. And if I bring it all the way up, you're going to be in danger of breaking up your path as well. And so I'm never going to come any closer than about that close from the string on this last one. And you can see how it is broken up all the way out to the string. See just how quickly this goes. And now that this is thoroughly broken up, one of the things that we have done is that we have broken what is called the capillarity in the soil. You see, the topsoil, when it's compressed and compact, actually is able to draw or wick water up from deep down, just like a wick pulls kerosene up in a lantern, and it wicks the water up and keeps it wet. Well, that's good when you need the water, but when the soil is already too dry, then it's actually beneficial to break that capillarity. In this case, our soil is just a little bit on the moist side. You see, I can crumble that soil up, which is a good sign, but it also is a little sticky, and it balls up a little bit, sticks to my hands, sticks to the tool. So now that we have broken this soil up, the top 12 inches like this, we've broken the capillarity, we're now going to let this bed sit for the rest of the day and overnight, and we're going to come back and finish the rest of the digging operations tomorrow, when hopefully the soil moisture will be just about perfect. So I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, well, here we are, and as you can see, overnight and this morning, the ground has dried out considerably from what it was yesterday, and so hopefully this will just make perfect digging. Since we spent all of that, well, it didn't take a whole lot of time, but since we did spend that time and that effort loosening up the top 12 inches, we don't want to walk back over on top of it and compact it down again. So we use a digging board that is about 2 feet in width and 4 feet that way, the same width as our bed. And I should mention right now the dimensions of this bed. Why do we make the bed 4 feet? Well, it doesn't have to be 4 feet. It can be anywhere from 3 to 5 feet wide. 3 feet is about the minimum in width that you want, because at 3 feet, that's where you get the best mini climate. I'll explain the mini climate a little bit later on when we go to the transplanting. And 5 feet, you don't want to go any wider than that, and 5 feet is too wide for some people, because you want to be able to stand in your pathway and without stepping onto the finished bed and compacting that soil again, you want to be able to reach halfway across the bed to do your picking, planting, or whatever you have to do. And from the other side, you can reach across halfway. Okay? 4 feet works very well for mid-stature people, women and children, and I found that is a good all-around width. Now I'm going to use my tool, the spade in this case, which is roughly 1 foot. It's actually about 11.5 inches, but it's close to 1 foot, and we are going to now dig 1 foot wide by 1 foot deep trenches, and I'm going to use my spade to measure back from the edge of the bed back approximately 1 foot. And at this point, I'm going to bring my fancy wheelbarrow over here a little bit closer, because this first trench, the soil is going to go into the wheelbarrow, and you will see why in a minute. Now I'm going to get here, and I'm going to want to just kind of cut an edge, because I've got some clods in this particular soil. I'm going to cut an edge along here, and we're going to shovel this soil off into the wheelbarrow like this. And you'll notice that this particular soil is fairly free of rocks. I haven't seen any rocks in it at all. It's a pretty clayey soil, and I understand from the owner of this particular piece of ground, this is not our place, but from the owner, I understand that it gets pretty hard like concrete in the summer when it dries out. And that is a result, not just because it's clay, but that's a result of the ratio between calcium and magnesium that is in the soil. Magnesium acts to pull the soil together very tight and hard, and it'll make it like concrete when it's dry. And calcium does just the opposite. It loosens the soil, or what they call flocculates it. And when you've got too much magnesium and not enough calcium in your clay soil, that's when it will get extremely hard. Now, organic matter plays a part too, that's true, but the calcium and magnesium ratio is also very critical to the texture of the soil. And so the remedy for a hard, heavy clay like that, the permanent remedy, is to get more calcium into the soil through a soil analysis and amendment, and and lower the magnesium level. And there are ways to do that, but that's a little bit outside the spectrum of this practical workshop. Right now we're just showing you how to do this dig. But even though this may be a hard soil when it's dry, you see right now how easily it works, because that moisture level is just perfect. Now, I'm not going to fill this wheelbarrow too full, because I've learned from experience that soil is heavy. And in fact, these wheels are so small, I'm not even going to be able to push it very well. I'm going to pull it down to the other end of the bed. By the way, I mentioned the width of the bed is critical. Minimum 3 feet, maximum 5. But as far as the length, it can be any length that you want. In this case, our bed is just a short 6 feet for the purposes of this demonstration. And at this point, you're probably wondering, well, why am I dumping the soil back at the other end of the bed? Well, you will see that will become quite clear as we finish this dig. Okay, you'll notice that I'm down on my knees now at this point because it makes a very comfortable working position. And you'll also notice, you remember that we edged all the way around the bed, and when we edged, I don't know, remember if I pointed this out or not. I may not have pointed it out, but when we edged, we didn't edge straight down. We actually edged in at a slight angle, angling out into the pathway area slightly, and there's an important reason for that. You can try to sit there and try to figure it out, and if you can't figure it out, we will tell you a little bit later on why we edge that out and why it's so important. So as I go, I'm edging, and in this first trench you want to make sure that you don't edge and dig out right up close to the stakes, because otherwise those stakes are driven in about 1 foot, and if you dig right up to the stake, it's going to collapse. The string is going to pull it right down. So we leave a little bit of soil right there around the stake. I'm going to cut my edge out here on the side as well, and on this side, and then we're going to shovel all of this soil right out of here until we get 1 foot deep. We'll know we're 1 foot by measuring here with the spade. As I'm digging here, I don't know if you can see on the camera or not, but you'll be able to see that the color of the soil is starting to change from the topsoil. You see how the reddish subsoil is coming up, and in order to get 1 foot down, we will get a little bit of mixing of the topsoil with the subsoil, but that really is all right, because we are actually in this process over the next few years after we've finished this dig, we're going to be developing 1 to 2 feet of topsoil. Okay, we finished our first trench, and I want you to notice here how this edge is edged right out here all the way up into this corner, and it goes edged down to here and all the way across. We have this edge cut out all the way back up into this corner, 1 foot wide and 1 foot deep. Okay, we're dumping our second barrel full back over on the other end, and now we're completely finished with that wheelbarrow, so we can put it aside. The digging out of the soil of that first trench is probably the most work in this whole process. After this, it is even easier. You see, that was pretty easy as it was because of the pre-loosening process, but after this, there's no more actual digging out and moving of soil, as you'll see. Now, the reason we opened this trench up is so that I can get down inside it, as I'm doing right now, and with the fork, I'm going to use the same technique as we used to loosen the top 12 inches. Now I'm going to loosen another 12 inches down at the bottom of this trench. And just like the way when we started at the edge of the bed here, at first you can only put the tines in just a few inches. In the same way down in this trench, we can only put the tines in just a few inches because otherwise, as I bring my tool handle down, the tines would hit up against the hard soil. So I can only go in just a little bit. Now I come back about 6 inches, in a little, back, in, back, in, back, in, back. Okay? don't you just come over here and take a look right down in the trench while I'm working so that you can see. In just a little, down, in, down, in, down, in, down, in, down. And you see how that just works out? And just the leverage process is all that needs to be done. I don't have to strain myself and lift that up or do anything. It just breaks up beautifully because that moisture level is just perfect. In a little at a time. Another thing is, don't just lean on this, shove it all the way in, and then try your best to crane back on that as hard as you can. It's hard on you. It's going to be a lot of effort, and not only that, but even though these tools are strong, you can break them. And so it's much easier on you and on the tool if you just put it in just an inch or so at a time. Use the leverage. A little bit more leverage. In a little more leverage. In all the way, leverage. And then also I come back just not more than 2 or 3 inches at a time from where it's been loosened already, so I don't take too big of a bite. That way it's very easy. Now, you'll notice that when I get about halfway back, I am all the way up against the edge of the trench here, and I can't, there's nowhere for me to go. If I was to get up here and stand up here, that would be a bad idea, because when this trench is open, you don't want to stand right on the edge, because of this edging out, you can make that path collapse in. Okay, so you don't want to do that. Plus, it is very awkward to be standing up on one level and trying to loosen down on another level. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn around and I'm going to work back the other way. And even though I have to stand on what was done already, you'll see how we'll fix that very easily at the end. Okay? So I go in just a little, down, in just a little bit more this time, and down, and I can't do any more than that because I'm so close to the side of the bed. Now I come back a couple of inches, in, down, in, down, in, down, in, and again, I'm still not back far enough this time to go all the way in, because I'm feeling the resistance. When you start, as soon as you feel the resistance, you don't want to force it. So I've got to come back a little bit more, and this time I'll be able to go all the way in, down, in, down, in, down, in, down, all the way in, and now I can bring it all the way down and loosen that up very thoroughly. Okay, just going to finish this trench out, loosening the bottom of the trench, another 12 inches, and as you can begin to see, the result is that we've loosened the top 12 inches, we open a trench and loosen the bottom 12 inches, and we get a total of 24 inches of loose, wonderful, aerated soil. Now I step back up out of the trench onto my board on the path again, and I'll just use my fork and just again quickly re-loosen that we did before. Break up the clods just a little bit, and that's done. So the first trench is finished. Now we're going to work on the second. That means that we come down, we pull our digging board back about a foot, use the spade to gauge it, make sure that's just about a foot. There it is. One of the things you always want to make sure that your board is square. You can do that by either measuring on both sides. You can also, if your board is good and square, you can always look at your string and the edge and make sure that that's parallel. Now I'm going to start on one side, and I'm going to slice off just about an inch or two of this pre-loosened soil at a time. Bring it back and just let it slide off and drop right into the first trench. What we're doing here is we're opening up another trench right next to the first, and we're using the soil from this first one to refill the first trench. Slice off an inch or so, and let it slide off there, and you'll see I'll just maybe break a few little clods, but don't spend a lot of time on that unless it's really, really bad. And I come all the way back to the board. The board becomes my guide. Something you'll want to be careful at when you do this last slice, don't pull back too hard on this, because you'll actually move yourself and the whole board back, and sometimes you won't notice that you've done that. And I've seen people wind up digging a trench that was 1.5 feet wide instead of a foot, and it causes problems. Okay, now that I've dug this all the way back, I move over 1 foot and start again. Cut off an inch or two and put it into the first trench. You'll notice that on this first one, we will have to let some of the soil spill outside the bed just a little bit to avoid this soil falling back into the trench that we're digging now. And we'll fix that later on. There's a friendly earthworm there. We're always happy to see those. And that is one of the benefits of this hand process of digging over rototilling, is that the rototiller just pulverizes those poor creatures completely, whereas you may slice a worm or two with the spade, and if you slice it in the right place, he'll just regrow. But for the most part, you see, we didn't hurt that one. It's a lot gentler on the soil and a lot gentler on the worms. And the other thing is that the rototiller pulverizes the soil too well. As we build this soil up with the right soil amendments and the sprout blend and other organic materials, we're going to build up a wonderful structure in the soil. It's actually called a crumb structure. It's just like good raised bread that has a nice open crumb structure, nice texture, and it makes it very easy for roots to penetrate, makes it very easy for you to pull the occasional weed that might be there, makes it very easy for the worms to go down through. And a rototiller does to the soil what a blender would do to good raised bread. If you took that slice of bread, put it down into a blender, just pulverizes it completely up into breadcrumbs. Then you take those breadcrumbs, you put them in a dish out in the sun and water them, and you know what you're going to have? You're going to have hard crackers. And that's exactly what happens to people that rototill every year. At first it makes it so nice and light and fluffy, but it makes a soil that is totally dependent upon that rototiller. You're going to have to come back next year and do it again and do it again and do it again, because you keep on breaking up that crumb structure. And then the other thing is that it can't go even 1 foot deep, much less 2 feet deep, and loosen the soil. And about 6 inches down, after you get that pulverized, fluffy soil, you get a hard pan created that the roots can't go down through. You're going to see that after we're finished digging this bed, we can plant our plants much closer together in these beds. The reason is that the roots can go straight down very, very deep. We don't have to plant in these great big wide rows and waste all of this space the way you do with a rototill garden. You have to do those wide rows in that case because the roots can't go down very deep. They've got to spread out, you see. So that's one of the benefits, some of the benefits of doing this. By the way, this double digging process in most cases will only have to be done once. Occasionally you might have to come back in a very, very bad soil, and you might have to do it a second year, but most time this is a permanent operation. We're not going to have to go through this again, and even if you do have to double dig a second year, it is so easy. It's like a hot knife through butter. the soil is so wonderful because you've never walked on it and recompacted it, and the worms and all the goodies that you've put on there have been working to keep that soil wonderful and loose. We're actually restoring the soil through this process back into a condition that's very, very similar to the way it was in the Garden of Eden, where they didn't have to go through all of that hard work. Okay? You'll see I've gone back to a partial kneeling position because it saves my back from having to bend over very much. And I'm getting it on down to a foot, remembering to cut my edges out here. Okay, until I get about a foot deep. And you notice now what's happening as a result of loosening the soil on the bottom of the trench, and then shoveling out this soil. You see how the soil is just raising up. So we're going to wind up with a raised bed effect, not by raking up soil from our pathways, but just by digging down deep enough to add in air. Air is all that we've added here that is creating the loft on this bed. Now you'll notice that when I'm working this way, I've switched hands, and I'm cutting my edge here on this other side, shoveling out, and because our first trench is filled up so much now, the soil is actually spilling out into the pathway, but we'll fix that at the end when we're finished. Okay, we're almost finished this next trench. Sometimes it's easy to get right down into the trench and work. All right, that's it. Now again, we go for our fork and we repeat this loosening process. I went ahead and finished 3 more trenches, and you notice how we're getting this beautiful loft, and it just raised up there. And I've got an open trench here, and right now I've got just 2 more trenches to do. So I'm going to pull this board back 1 more foot, and let's just go through this whole process one more time. I'm going to measure back, and now I want you to come up close here so that you can watch exactly what I'm going to do here. Oh, that's refreshing. Absolutely necessary equipment when you're out here working, especially when it's warm. Good bottle of pure water and a good sun hat. Right now we're in the middle of November. It's about 60 degrees out here. It's not too bad, but when it gets really hot, I put myself on a hat with a brim all the way around, and it really helps to keep you cool, and it keeps you from having heat stroke. Another thing is you want to make sure that you have good, sturdy boots. Just light shoes and sneakers. You will start getting a pain in your instep after a while. So if you have the right equipment and you let the tools do the work, as I'm teaching you here, it's really very, very easy. Okay? So I'm going to slice off. That's actually a little bit of a big chunk there. Don't want any more than that for sure. 1 inch or 2. And you notice I just slice it off. It goes so easy because it was pre-loosened. I lift it up, move it forward just a few inches, and just let it slide right off. This is not really hardly work. It's just a little bit of gentle, repetitive motion exercise kind of thing, the kind that all the doctors say is the absolute best. I have taught people from 3 or 4 years of age all the way up into their 80s how to double dig like this, and they can do it. The only difference is the speed, maybe. Now, I want to point something out here. I'm just taking it from this trench, and I'm moving it forward and slide right off into this trench right here. I am not, let's move over here, take another trench off. I'm not trying to throw this up here on the pile. That's what a lot of people try to do sometimes and get a little bit carried away. Not only is that too much work, but it's not what you want to do. You're not trying to make a pile here. You're just trying to fill in this trench. If you keep throwing all of the soil forward onto the same pile up in front here, what will happen is that when you get back to the end, you'll have a big hole on this side of the bed over here and a great big pile of soil over there, and you'll have to wind up shoveling it all back. And so if you will just make sure that you just do it the easy way, a little bit of a slice, bring it forward just a few inches there, let it fall right off. Slice it off, bring it forward, slide right off. The right way is actually the easy way. That's nice about these skills here. Okay? Now at this point, I'm going to have to actually get down again. I'm going to slice that off a little bit and get down and shovel the last of this out. And again, I'm just shoveling only 1 foot from here to here. I'm not going to throw it way up there. Okay? And when you really start getting good at this, you'll notice on the part that I've dug back there already, how just in the digging process, I've already got a nice rounded, mounded shape here on the bed. And you'll see when we get to the raking, that is actually the final finished shape that we want to achieve. So if in the process of digging you learn to place your soil carefully, you'll start getting that shape right away. That won't happen on your first dig or even on your second dig, but the better you get at this, you'll find out that you'll have less raking at the end to do. Okay, you notice I've got down in the trench again to finish this up. And I'm going to make sure to remember to dig my edges out there. Also, something else is sometimes you'll find that in digging out your trench, you didn't quite loosen deep enough when you first loosened the top 12 inches. And if you run into some compacted soil, instead of hacking away at it with the spade, you can just get down in here with the fork and use it to loosen it just a few more inches to make it nice and loose and easy to dig out with your spade. Work smarter, not harder, is a motto that I really like. Okay? Chopping my edge out a little more. Getting the last of this up. And I look and see I've got some low spots up here. That's where I'm going to put the soil over here in the center now, so that I don't have to do quite so much raking and shaping at the end. Okay? Now I come with my fork, in a little, down, in, down, and that's all I can do at first. Now I come back a few inches, in, down, in, down, in, down, in, down, in, and I can go all the way in. Come back a little bit more, and I repeat this. And you can really start getting a rhythm. It's not really very hard because the tool is doing the work. Okay, halfway across, and I've got to turn around now and work from the other side. In, down, in and down. And I can only go in a little bit at first. Come back. Okay. This will be about the last one now. In, down, and in and back. I step out onto my board, and I just quickly reloosen what I have stepped on. This is kind of sticky here because it's clay, but I'm mixing all this air in and loosening it up so nicely. This is going to encourage the worms and the roots to get down here, and this is going to just transform that into beautiful, loose, loamy soil in a couple of years. Now on this last trench I can get rid of my board entirely because I'm right back to the path. Take a small slice off and just slide it forward. Small slice. Slide it forward. Another small slice. Slide it forward. The last slice. And slide it forward. And move over 1 foot and repeat the whole process again. Now when I get a really big clod like that, I'll just take a minute to chop it up. Take another slice. Another slice. Throw it forward. Move over 1 foot. Just a small slice that's not very heavy. Doesn't take too much effort. Another small slice. You see, it just would not be this easy if we hadn't pre-loosened. If I was over here in the hard path trying to dig, oh man, that would be hard work. But because of that easy, quick pre-loosening that just took a few minutes to do with the fork, this shoveling process here is so easy and goes relatively quickly. Now, you might remember a few minutes ago when we were beginning this dig, I was pointing out how this particular soil has very few rocks. I haven't seen a rock yet, and that's really wonderful. But I don't want you to worry if you do have rocky or stony soil, because I've dug many a bed in rocky soil, even soil with very large rock, gravel, everything in between, and it's really not that much more difficult if you use every one of these techniques that I've been describing to you, with the pre-loosening the fork and especially having the moisture content right. The only difference is that as we're turning up rocks, it'll just take a little bit longer to stop and pull those rocks out, throw them in your wheelbarrow, and get rid of them permanently. And it might take you 2 or 3 times as long as digging a bed in soil like this that has no rocks, but let me tell you, it is well worth that extra time, because then you have not just 2 feet of soil, of rock-free soil, but you see how this bed is raising up about another foot. So we got about 3 feet of rock-free soil, and even up north where they have frost heave, I guarantee you that it will be years and years and years before you ever see a rock in these permanent beds again. And that is well worth it. That is another thing that you will not be able to achieve with a rototiller. Now, I'm edging out on the side again. And here's a spot where I haven't been able to get down deep enough with the fork. So I'm going to get down in there and loosen it up just a little bit more so I can dig out the full 12 inches. It's much easier to loosen with the fork than it is with the spade. I'm working smarter, not harder. I'm trying to work quickly now because we're actually coming up to the end of the day, and you won't be able to see me work in the dark so well. Okay, that's almost that end of the trench finished, but we've got to remember to edge out our end here. Okay, now I'm going to step down in, and I'm going to finish up this other side, cutting my edge out. On the other side, a little bit more loosening with the fork. It didn't get loosened in the beginning. Okay, I'm shoveling out the last of the soil on the last trench, on the last half. I'm going to remember to cut my edge here on the end, like so. that up and out of here. And now, our only last operation to finish this trench is to do our loosening. Remember, don't go all the way in the first time or else you'll break a tine. I did a workshop earlier this year over in Hawaii, and a dear lady actually made that mistake. These tools are very sturdy, but she caught onto a rock and forced it and broke one of her tines out. By the way, these Clarington Forge tools have a lifetime guarantee. Not only are they built to last a lifetime, but should you even abuse them and break a tine or a handle, in that unlikely event, you can actually get a free replacement for the lifetime of the tool. Another thing that makes it well worth a few extra dollars that you will pay. Another thing is, for the first time that I ever tried double digging, I used cheap tools that I got from a local department store, and it seemed like a lot of work. Then I did an apprenticeship at Ohio University where I learned the right techniques and used these Clarington Forge tools, which they used to call bulldog tools back in those days. And I tell you, when you get a quality tool in your hand, it is just like the difference between driving a cheap car and a Cadillac. The feel in your hands is wonderful. You feel the quality. The tool works harder for you. The work is so much easier. And I will never go back to the cheap tools. I would break them every season anyway. And it wound up being more expensive. Harder work and more expensive because I had to replace them. These tools, you pay more to begin with, but should you ever abuse it so much that you break it, you actually get a free replacement. It's just like the fact that this digging process, some people look at it and say, oh, that's more work than I want to do. It's so much easier to get out there and do my rototiller. Well, let me tell you, this is the only time probably that we're going to have to do this. It's like building a house. If you build a house, that first process of the building takes quite a while. It's quite a lot of work. But afterwards, when the house is well built, the maintenance of it only takes a little bit of time every day, every week. And it's like that with these beds. You have built a wonderful house for the microbes, for the worms, which get so happy that they start doing the work of tilling, digging, and turning, and improving for you. And the plant's roots go deeper, and they get in on the act too. And you will not have to rototill every year. You will not have to double dig every year. At most, all you'll have to do is come back at the beginning of the season and with your fork just surface cultivate the very surface of the ground. That'll only take you a few minutes. And all of your neighbors who garden will be quite envious of you probably that you have such ease, plus the results of what you will be able to grow in this bed. The quality, the quantity absolutely outdoes conventional methods. Plus, you use less water and less other resources. Okay, at this point, I'm going to switch to the third tool. You remember I said there's basically only 3 main tools that we need to use in this process. The 2 most important are the spade and fork. We also will use a rake. At this point, I'm going to rake the last of this soil back in to this trench, and you'll notice that we don't have quite enough soil here, but here is where we're going to take our spade, and this soil that went too far, we're going to bring it back down to the other end. Let's pick our fork back up. You know, as tool safety, we'll always put the sharp ends in the ground like this, or else if we're going to lay it down on the ground, sharp end of the tool down. Okay? So we don't want anybody getting hurt out here. So we're just going to move this soil with the spade because it goes a lot faster when we've got a lot of soil to move it with the spade than to try to rake it. And our final operation is going to be the raking and the shaping. And as I mentioned before, the more experience you gain with this digging process, the less of this shoveling you'll have to do at the end and the less raking. But don't worry if you don't get it right the first time, because as I said, this is a permanent bed and we're not going to have to do this again. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, now just as we've got slope sides on the sides, we're going to slope the sides on the end as well. So I'm going to shovel a little bit more of this soil back this way to start developing the slope on the end of my bed here. And now I look and see that I've still got way too much soil in the center of the bed. Let me work from this side. So now I'm going to move it from here down to the end of the bed and fill in. Take it from the high spots and fill in the low spots. Work all the way around, equaling the soil out. And we're almost there. A little more there. And that's a good rough finish with a spade. Now the final skill is the shaping with the rake. And this is actually takes the most skill of all because it's really all in the eye and it'll take some practice. But basically what we want to do is we want to start from the sides and we get right up to the string and we pull the soil up and over the center, and you have to change the pressure as you go so that you knock down the high spots and fill in the low spots and start developing this rounded, mounded shape that we want for our finished bed. I'm just pulling these clods up, and I'll show you how to deal with these clods in just a minute. Pulling up past the center. Now I'm going to come around and work from the other side. Past the center, developing this rounded shape, moving up, pulling up, modulating the pressure. Okay, now these big clods I'm going to pull off and pull down into the path area, like so. And then you can do a couple things. You can just kind of dance on them and break them up like this. And then you can rake them back up on the bed. In this case, for the sake of time, I'm just going to rake them out of the way. Next step, to rake along the end and get that 45-degree angle. You can break clods by standing on them, stomping on them in the pathway. You can also break clods by doing something called tilting. And that is you take your spade, not your spade, but your fork, like this, and you don't hit straight down on the bed like that and compact it. You actually strike those clods sideways like this and break them up. That's called tilthing, and that works very well. Okay, I'm going to shape the other end here, and now the final step is to rake along the length of the bed like this. And again, you're working to lower the high spots and even them out and fill in the low spots. Come around to this side and rake down the length of the bed, and we have a good finish here. Rake these clods out of the way. Those can be broken up and raked back onto the bed. Now the last step is to get our digging board. We have actually put so much air into the bed that just over the course of time, water and rain would actually cause that bed to collapse again. And so we're going to take out the excess air and develop a nice, beautiful, smooth planting surface by getting our digging board and walking across it. The board distributes our weight evenly. We've got a nice, smooth finish now. I'm going to move this up a little bit. Now I just walk right across it. I'm stomping on it, putting a little extra weight because I'm not that heavy. If you're pretty heavy, all you may have to do is just walk across it. Okay. And you can see, if you come up nice and close, you can see what a beautiful, smooth surface that makes on that bed. Okay, come down to the end, all the way across. You see now we've actually got more than 4 feet across the top of this bed now, which is another benefit of doing this kind of a finish as opposed to having boards on your side like this. Now this particular raised bed over here is boards, and that's fine. Some people prefer to do that on the sides of their double duck beds and then just having flat sides. I actually prefer to do it this way because it's less work, less time, less expense on all of the boards that you don't have to put on. And then because of the curvature of the surface, you actually wind up with more planting area, and you can get more plants in the same area for still higher production than you could with a flat bed. So all in all, I think it's a good deal. And personally, and again, there's room for personal preference. You can do it differently if you want. But personally, I think the mounded bed is beautiful. I have a lot of people that like to make fun who say, oh, it looks like a grave. Yeah, that's fine. They can make fun. But I'm the one that has fun when I don't have the problems in my garden that they have, and I have the superior production. Okay, if you have soil that is just perfectly balanced, which is usually never, then at this point you would be ready to plant. But if not, we have taken a soil analysis of this bed, and we know, or of the soil in this garden, we know what it needs. And this is not actually real soil amendments that I have here. It's just sand for this particular demonstration. But I just want to show you how to apply it here. The most accurate way to do it is actually by hand. And normally I would actually wear surgical gloves if I am putting on certain amendments that might be a little bit hard on my skin. And I'll pick up a handful like this and then just shake my hand vigorously from the wrist back and forth like this so that I get a nice even sprinkling of those amendments across the whole bed. You actually want to go a little bit too thin deliberately at first, because once these amendments are down, you cannot pick them up, but you can always come back and fill in the thin spots. It's very important. A lot of gardeners don't make it a habit of putting their amendments down easily. They just shovel some here and shovel some there, and they'll wind up with 50 or 60 different kinds of soil in their garden because they haven't done anything uniformly. But it's really very important to fertilize and amend uniformly so that you have the same soil everywhere. That's going to give you the same good results everywhere. Okay? Now, after you have broadcast your amendments on, then you want to mix them in, and there's two ways to do that, depending upon how you have sampled and tested, and that information will be in your manual. You can either fork this in 12 inches deep, if that's the instructions that you have been given, or you might only mix this in on the surface. And in that case, you take your fork and turn it backwards and just kind of wiggle it and work these amendments in just a few inches, like that. Wiggle, wiggle, mix, mix. Okay, and again, just for sake of time, I'll just do that short demonstration like that. I won't bother to do the whole thing because I want to show you how to do the planting and transplanting here before we lose the last of our light on this beautiful day that we've spent here together. Okay, I'm going to show you now how to transplant, and we got some strawberries here that we have transplanted from another part of the garden, and you want to use either a trowel, or in this case we've got a little hand fork that will work just as well for large things like this, and we're going to space these on 12-inch centers, and the technique is the same no matter what you're transplanting. The spacing distances for the different crops are listed in the chart in the back of your manual. And the way you want to start off is start off with half the difference. You notice I'll use a spacing stick. That is the 12 inches or whatever other spacing that we're using for that particular crop. And I will start off with half that distance and come in 6 inches from the side and 6 inches from the end of the bed, and make my little mark right there, and that's where my first plant is going to go. Now I want you to notice this technique that I learned from a commercial market gardener who needed to know how to do these things very, very quickly. It's very efficient and makes the work go not only more quickly but more enjoyably. You want to hold your trowel or your tool like a dagger, like this, instead of holding it in the regular way. Hold this way like a dagger, put it in place, thrust it straight down, push it straight back to push the soil that way. Now pull straight forward, and that opens up your hole. Drop your plant in to the right depth. At this point, I don't want to bury the crown of my strawberry plant. With other transplants, you want to transplant them usually at the same depth that they were. With certain things like tomatoes and cucumbers, other vine crops, you'll want to actually put them in all the way up to the first 2 leaves. Okay, in this case, I don't want to bury the crown. Now I grab, again, I still have my trowel in the same position, and I use my thumb and forefinger and just gently thrust straight forward here to close up my hole. Then take 2 fingers, make a little ring, circle around there for watering purposes, and that's it. I'm done. I don't have to do a lot of fussing and moving and pounding and everything like that. Now from that first plant, I'm going to measure over a foot, make my mark, down, back, pull straight forward to open my hole up, drop the plant in, thrust straight forward, make my circle around, and that's it. It's very quick. Get another plant here. Down, back, pull straight forward, drop it in, thrust down, make my circle around. That's it. In this case, I have 1 more. There will be 4 in this first row. Down, back, pull straight forward, Make sure all those roots are down in, thrust straight forward, make my circle around. Now, on the next row, they're going to be equidistant. 12 inches from this first plant and 12 inches from this plant in a triangle formation. And it's going to be down, back, pull forward, drop it in, thrust forward, make my little circle, which will allow me to come along and water these plants as soon afterwards, after transplanting as possible, to avoid transplant shock. In the cool time of the year like this, it's not something we really even have to worry about. But in the summer you definitely do, or even in the late spring. Down, back, pull forward, thrust, circle. Measure from this plant and from this plant, make my mark, and you'll notice that while there were 4 plants the first row, there'll only be 3 this time. And so you'll actually start developing diagonal rows this way and diagonal rows this way, and the finished effect on the bed is really very, very beautiful. And once the crops have grown up to maturity, the spacings are such that the leaves will just barely touch, and you will not be able to see the soil at all. It will be one complete canopy, and this is where you develop that mini climate that I was talking about before. That actually shades the soil. It provides a living green mulch instead of having to do a lot of work on traditional mulching, although I highly recommend that you do mulch conventionally as well to protect the soil while the crops are growing up. And also that green canopy holds in carbon dioxide that is produced in the soil by the roots breathing and by the microbes breathing. And as that carbon dioxide is coming up out of the soil, the canopy holds it in instead of allowing it to escape, as happens with row crops. And as most people know, green plants, the leaves, use carbon dioxide to photosynthesize and convert it into sugar. And so with this mini climate effect, you actually get faster, more vigorous plant growth than you do when the crops are planted out in regular rows. There's also a mini climate that is formed under the ground beneath, and I believe that there is some discussion of that in your book. Okay, I'm going to show you now how to water. A wonderful tool to use in watering these beds is a watering wand, and actually a lot of people like to set things up automatically with drip irrigation and all the rest of it. And I have found that there is no type of automatic system. If you do have to use an automatic system, drip would be the best, but even drip irrigation and even more so overhead irrigation cannot match the accuracy of hand watering, where you can put more water where more water is needed, less water where it's not needed. You can also make sure that you only water the beds and don't waste any water in the paths and just grow weeds in your paths. Also, by watering daily, which we highly recommend, unless you're in a time of the year like the fall or very early spring where the ground is already so damp that you don't need to water daily. But in the summer, when it's hot, you definitely need to water daily. Sometimes you need to water morning and evening because you want to keep the soil evenly moist. And by being out in your garden at least once or twice a day for just a few minutes, it'll only take you a few seconds or a minute at most to water each and every bed. And by doing that, it also gives you a wonderful, peaceful time of meditation out there in the garden that is so powerfully healing and stress relieving. It also gives you opportunity to observe your plants and your soil closely, see when things are getting ready for harvest, see if any problems might be developing, such as pest problems or disease problems which need to be addressed. Whereas if you're not out there in the garden every single day, if you start missing days or even weeks, all kinds of problems can develop and you never even know about it. But by being out there daily, putting that water on daily, you're going to find that your crops are going to grow at their absolute optimum. It gives you the wonderful, peaceful time out there, and it also gives you an opportunity to observe your garden very closely. Okay, I'm going to turn my water on here now, and I'm going to keep it moving on the bed. And because this is a very small bed, it goes pretty quickly, but you notice because of the loosening of the soil, how that water is just soaking right straight in, and you notice when it starts to get a sheen on it, that's when it's time to stop. Okay? When the soil is no longer taking the water very rapidly, you start to see round sheens developing, that's where you have the saturation of the bed. There's a real art to starting your own seedlings, but I guarantee you that if you will follow the methods that I'm about to show you, and if you will use the types of tools and flats that I'm about to demonstrate to you, that you will have success. Okay, the first thing that you'll notice that's a little bit different about the flats that we're using is that they are a lot deeper than the average garden flat or than the little cell packs that you can buy seedlings in down at your local store in the springtime. This flat is constructed out of 1x4 lumber. This particular one happens to be made out of cedar. You can use any rot-resistant wood, but if all you've got is pine, even that will last for more years than you would imagine. This particular flat right here was made out of 1x4 pine, and I think it's been about 3 or 4 years since I built it, and I haven't found any rot in it yet. It's all how you take care of it, as long as it's not just sitting in water or something like that. The pine one is a little bit heavy, especially when it gets the soil in it, especially since you'll notice that I used 1x4 lumber on the bottom as well. To hold the weight down, I've used 1/8" mesh hardware cloth here on the bottom, which makes the whole thing much, much lighter and easier to move around. This size of a flat, though, you'll find that once you have your potting soil in it and it's soaked with water, it still has a good bit of weight. And so you might want to build half-size flats or whatever works best for you. There's no rule on the dimensions as far as the overall size this way. The main thing that you want is that you want a minimum of 3 inches depth of soil. And so the 1x4s work well because actually it's not a true 1x4. It's usually 3.5 inches deep. And by the time your soil is pressed down within there, you have about 3 inches depth of soil. You'd be surprised what a difference that extra depth of soil with these flats can make as compared to the shallow flats or the shallow cell packs. A friend of mine and I started some tomato seedlings once at about the same time, and at the end of 30 days I said, hey, why don't you come over and take a look at my tomato plants. The tomatoes out of the flats were on average about so high. I said, oh, that's nice. You got started yours about a couple months ago, right? No. Started them at the same time that yours were started. His and the cell packs were only maybe about 4 inches tall. So it's quite obvious that because of the extra soil that the roots are able to pull nutrition out of, you get a much bigger head start on the growth of the plants, and this in turn is going to not only speed up your harvest, but also they're going to be much stronger plants, much stronger transplants. Okay, that's enough explanation. Let's get on and show you exactly how to start these seedlings. First of all, of course, you want to fill your flat up with the potting soil. I usually like to fill mine up level with the top of the sides, because we're going to tamp that down. Now you can cut yourself out a piece of plywood that just fits just inside and use that as a tamper. You can put some handles on it if you like this. Or you can take the time to make yourself a tamping and marking tool like I've done here, where we've actually drilled out a pattern of holes and put dowels in. These are 2 inches apart on an equilateral triangle spacing. You see they're running diagonally. Each one of these pegs is exactly 2 inches apart. That is the spacing that you want to start all of your seedlings in these flats. It will give you the very best growth on all of your seedlings. And this is kind of nice because it will allow you to, in one operation, do the tamping and marking all in one operation, and you will have some nice holes all marked out. If you don't have a tamper marker combination tool like that, and you've just tamped with a flat piece of plywood, the other thing you can do is build yourself a little marker out of 1 inch or 2 inch chicken wire. Here you'll just lay that chicken wire on top, and in the case of 1 inch, you'll place your seeds every other spacing. I actually like the 1 inch wire a little better. It holds its shape a lot better than the 2 inch, but you can experiment with 2 inch and see if that works. But really, the combination tamper and marker really works the best. Okay, we've got our little seed packet here, and I'm going to open this up. This happens to be broccoli, green sprouting Calabrese broccoli, one of my favorites. And we'll put a few seeds here in our little cup, and I'm going to show you a couple of methods that you can use. The one that I've used for years is just a little pair of tweezers, and you can grab a seed at a time. And I actually like to put 2 seeds at least per hole. That way, if one doesn't germinate, the other will. And even if they both germinate, after they're up a couple of inches, what you do is you select the weaker, shorter seedling and come along with a little pair of scissors and just snip that off, and you do a selection process, and you wind up having the strongest genetics growing. For the same reason, you also always want to start more seedlings in your flat than you actually need out in the garden. Because again, when you later on do your transplanting, you're going to select the largest, strongest, healthiest plants and transplant them. And all the way along, you do this selection process, and you get the very, very strongest plants. So the tweezers is one simple method that you can use to plant your seed down into your holes in the soil here. It's one that I find very easy, but some people find it a little bit difficult to play around with those tweezers. This other method that I'm going to show you is one that I actually learned from one of my students at a workshop that I once gave, and that is the pencil method. And the way that he showed me was with the eraser. You can touch the eraser to your tongue, wet it a little bit, and it will actually pick up several seeds. You can then touch it in and knock off 2 or 3 at a time into your hole like that. Then I had another friend recently who told me, well, I used the other end of the pencil. I said, that couldn't possibly work, and it didn't work at first for me, but actually it does when you get the hang of it. And again, you can use the pointy end of the pencil, wet it, and I actually think I like this better because this has now picked up 3 seeds, which is perfect. 2 or 3 seeds per hole is really just ideal. Whereas the eraser, when I do it, maybe I had it too wet, I don't know, but I just seem to get Yeah, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seeds or something like that. So anyway, see what works best for you. The tweezers might work best, the eraser method, or the pointy end of the pencil. The main thing is to get 2 or 3 seeds per hole. Once you have gotten your seeds down in your hole, then you can just come along and pinch the holes shut, and you're done as far as you're planning. You'll just want to come along and water the flat after you've put them in. Okay, I want to show you a couple of very important pointers on watering these flats, because you remember we've covered up our seed pretty shallowly, not much more than an eighth of an inch or so of soil on top, and we don't want a good strong torrent of water that will wash that soil or wash the seeds away even. So you want to start with either a mister or a fogger or a pretty fine rose head like we've got here. You can also use a watering can that has a real fine rose on it, preferably one that you can turn the rose pointing upward, because what we're going to do is we're not going to point the stream of water straight down at the flat and run the risk of washing the soil off the seeds. I'm going to open this up here and show you the way we want to do this. I'm going to adjust it for a nice gentle flow, and I'm actually going to point this upward so that we get just a gentle falling rain effect. And then as we begin to move this across the flat, I'm not going to let it just sit in one spot like this again and flood it. I'm going to keep it moving. Keep it moving across the flat like so. You see that I'm actually holding the wand here back away from the flat so that the water is going up and over, keeping the water moving back and forth across the flat until we get it good and thoroughly soaked. The water's going on gently and soaking in slowly. And you'll see that we have a good, nice, thoroughly watered flat. Because even the slightest residue of water will help to rust to set in, and it's like a cancer, and it's very difficult or impossible to get rid of. What you want to do is just scrape the excess mud off with some kind of a stick or any flat hard surface, and then get an oily rag. You can use just regular cooking oil or mineral oil or lightweight machine oil, and rub that tool down very thoroughly. It will finish cleaning it, and it will leave a light coating of oil that protects your investment in good quality tools, keeps rust out. The other thing that I just want to mention quickly is tool safety. Whether it's your fork, your spade, or a rake, any tool that has sharp points on it, if you're going to lay it on the ground, make sure that you lay with the sharp tines down, never pointed up. Same thing with your fork and your spade. Either leave them lying down like this with the sharp ends down, or else stick them in the ground. That avoids injuries and difficulties. Another thing is, if you're going to carry them down low. Never sling them over your shoulder like this. You never know when you're going to turn, there's someone behind you and you take out an eye or something else like that. These may seem to be small points, but they can be very, very important points. The first skill that we're going to demonstrate is called skimming. And we're going to show you how to get rid of any weed cover, grass, sod, or even small brush very, very quickly. And in the process, you'll actually get rid of most of your weed seeds too. Before you start though, it's very important, especially on a new tool with your spade, to get a good sharp edge on the tool. That is going to make not only the skimming go very easily, but when we get into the digging, the blade will cut through the soil much more easily and there'll be a lot less effort on your part. We're going to show you how, in all of these skills, how to let the tools do the work so that for you it's very, very easy. And remember, every step that we're going to do here in this entire process is a one-time thing. It's an investment like building your house. And then later on, you're going to have a garden that needs less time and less labor than the average garden actually needs. Okay? Now, the way you do the skimming is if you're right-handed, you're going to grab what is called the cob of the handle. This right here is called the cob, and this is a D handle. You grab the cob with your right hand, palm down, and then you grab the shaft of the tool with your left hand, again palm down. And if you're left-handed, you just reverse everything. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to grab the tool this way and hold my blade parallel to the ground. Then there's a couple of different positions that you can take up. You can either bend your knees, squat a little bit so that you can come down low to the ground, or else you can actually get down and work on one or two knees. This is an especially comfortable position if you have any kind of back problems at all, like I have. So I'm going to work in this position right now. I'll probably work in both. But now what you're going to do is you're going to actually thrust this spade straight ahead. You'll notice how my elbows bend rather than just swinging it with your arms straight, because if you just swing it this way, the tool is going to curve and you're going to take great big gouges of soil out, and you're going to just make a great big mess. The idea is that we're going to just skim the top quarter to half inch of soil and weeds and brush and grass off and remove them and get rid of them very quickly. This is the way it goes. You're going to thrust it forward like this and then turn it off to the side. Thrust it, turn it off. Thrust it, turn it off. And it makes a lot more sense to throw your skimmings out to the outside, away from your bed. You notice that I'm skimming in the path area first. If I turn it onto the bed, then before I can skim that area, I'm going to have to go and rake all of that off. So you don't want to make double work for yourself. So we're going to go ahead and just very quickly skim this entire path area all the way around the bed. As you can see, we've skimmed the paths all the way around the bed now, and we've turned it all off to the side. Then you can come along with a rake and just rake that up into little piles all the way around that you can later on pick up with your fork, put in the wheelbarrow, and carry off to a compost site. This will break down and make good material for a potting soil mix later on, or you can even bring it back to your beds later on. Okay, in just a minute, I'm going to get my spade and we'll finish skimming the bed area. The easiest way to skim the bed area is to draw an imaginary line down the middle of the bed, lengthways, and hit this one half at a time. In other words, we're going to skim this half and throw this half all off to this side, and then when we're through, we're going to go around to the other end side of the bed and skim back this way and turn it all off that way. You see, because it's much easier for me, being right-handed, to turn off to my left rather than to try to throw it off that way. It's kind of awkward, okay? So do things the easy way, okay? And of course, as I said, if you're left-handed, everything is reversed. Okay, so I'm going to do this side and come right down, turning it off into the pathway areas from which we will rake it up afterwards. And you see that this just goes very, very fast. Okay, we have finished skimming the entire pathway and bed area, and we've raked everything up now on the side with our rake, and now we can load it up to our wheelbarrow and get it out of our way. And you'll find that when you have a big pile of skimmings like this with grass and weeds and soil, your digging fork will be the easiest thing to be able to grab huge bites at one time. It'll go into the pile more easily than the spade will. But as you get closer to the bottom, especially if your soil is rather sandy like it is here, you'll see how it's starting to fall through the tines. And so don't be afraid to switch to a more appropriate tool. Now we can just scoop up the remnants with the spade. And while I'm doing this, I'm noticing that my wheelbarrow is getting a little on the full side. You'll find that soil is heavy. So don't overfill your wheelbarrow. If you have a really big wheelbarrow, don't fill it at all. Why make things harder on yourself? Just figure out how much you can wheel away without working too hard. And then this whole process becomes not only good, health-giving, gentle, repetitive motion exercise, which the doctors say is the very best kind of exercise you can get, but you'll be having fun along the way. You won't even have to break a sweat or work up your heart rate too much. Now that we've skimmed both our bed area and the pathways around the bed, the next important skill is called edging. We're going to use our spade and we're going to cut an edge all the way around the perimeter of this bed. And you'll see that this is very, very important because as we start to do the actual groundbreaking skills in the next steps, we don't want the pathway area to get broken up. And so by cutting this edge all the way around, it keeps the breakup of the ground on the inside of the bed where it belongs, and it keeps the pathways from being broken up. Already, this is another skill which is easy to see that a curved shovel just would not work very well. You need the flat blade to cut a good straight edge. Same thing with the skimming before, by the way. A shovel just would not do the job very well. Now, you'll notice as I go that I will be holding my spade at an angle, probably about a 15 or 20 degree angle from straight up and down. It's a natural angle that keeps the handle of the tool going at about the same angle as my foot. And so it feels very natural, very comfortable. The tool just becomes a logical extension of my body, and I let the tool do the work. Again, instead of putting forth a lot of energy and trying to hammer down on this tool with my foot and start getting a sore instep and exerting a lot of energy, all I do is just lean my body weight onto the tool and rock it back and forth, and it just works its way in. Now, in rocky soil, you'll sometimes come to a rock and you can't get any further. Here I've hit a rock. Don't worry about it. Just go as deep as you can. I'm going to move over now, and again, we're just going to lean body weight onto the tool and rock from side to side, and this time I can get all the way in. Again, leaning my body weight onto the tool, rocking from side to side, and I'm not even breaking a sweat. My heart is not going any faster. This is actually really fun. I never forget in one particular seminar where we demonstrated these techniques, everybody kind of pretended that the spade was their partner, and this was like a little natural dance out in nature. And it doesn't hurt anything. No immorality in this. Just nothing but pure fun. And you can really get a rhythm going. And if you want, some soft music in the background wouldn't hurt either. In fact, if you turn to your manual on the chapter in gratitude, you'll see how beneficial the right kind of music can be for your plants later on. If you want to play some music while you're having fun out here doing these techniques, oh, I'm sure it'll be even more fun. Notice the angle of the spade, and that's very important. Later on, I'll show you why that angle is important. You do not want to have your blade going straight up and down like this. And I said, if I explain now, you won't actually be able to see it, but I promise I will explain that to you when we get to the actual digging. Now that we've edged all the way around our beds, we've switched tools. We're going to use our fork now, and this is a very fun skill and a very important skill. Every step that we do all the way through this process makes the following steps go much more easily. And this pre-loosening of the top 12 inches makes the rest of the dig go like a piece of cake. What we're going to do, again, we're going to let the tool do the work. I just want to emphasize that no matter how it looks to you sitting there just watching this, this isn't really work. This is fun. And the tools are doing the work for you. And I mean, I'm just having a blast out here. I wish that you could be in here doing it with me. And in fact, I encourage you, as soon as you learn, get your tools and get out there and do it. And you'll find out that it really is a load of fun. Okay, what I'm going to do is, instead of just, again, ramming down on this fork and sinking it all in with my might and wasting a lot of energy and then rearing back on the tool, I'm not going to do all that. That's hard on you and it's hard on the tools. And so what I'm going to do is, I don't start all the way up against my string because the ground is always going to break up a couple of inches to the outside of the most outside tine here. So I come in a couple of inches, set my tool down, and just push it in an inch or two. Then I'm going to use the leverage of the tool, bringing the handle all the way down and breaking up the soil. Now here I'm going to go in just a little bit more. That was almost too much. This soil is really easy to work here. And now I'm going to bring it all the way down. And already it's breaking up all the way to the outside. So at this point, on this first row, I'm not going to go all the way in. That's as far as I'm going to go, because if I sink it any deeper and pull back, I'm going to be breaking up my path area, which is something I absolutely don't want to do. Okay? Now I come over, and again I repeat the process. In about an inch, bring it all the way down. In a little more, bring it down. In a little more, bring it down, and when it breaks up all the way to the outside, that's where I'm through. There's something else I want you to notice. A lot of people, when they're first starting this skill, they'll put their tines in, and they'll pull the handle right back straight towards themselves, and they can't get very much breakup. And they say, well, I can't do it. Well, all you have to do is stand with your body slightly to one side, okay? Now, everyone is either right-handed or left-handed, usually, unless you're ambidextrous. And usually you'll find out that with working with these tools with your feet, you'll find that either your left foot or your right foot is more comfortable. In my case, I'm left-footed. And so my left foot I find more comfortable, and I can work with my right hand, standing slightly to one side, and bring the handle down. Now, if you feel more comfortable with your right foot, and if you're left-handed especially, you might work the other way. Try both ways, see what works best for you, okay? So I want to go in a little bit, pull it all the way down, and you see that by standing to one side, I can bring the handle almost all the way to the ground and get a lot of leverage, a lot of breakup. It's that leverage that's doing the work for you. Now that we've done the full width of the bed and that first row coming across where we couldn't get the tines all the way in, I'm going to come back not more than about 6 inches. Again, you don't want to take great big huge bites because it's going to be harder work on you and harder work on the tool. So you only come back about 6 inches and in a little, down, in a little, down, in, down. This time you see I can go all the way in, down, in, down, in, down, in, down, all the way in, and pull it back. In, down, in, down, in, down. This skill goes very, very rapidly. I'm almost halfway through already. One thing you want to be aware of is that if you're working in a rocky soil, pay attention to when you hit rocks. If they're very small, you can just break up the rock, loosen up the rock right with it very easily. But here at this point, you hear that? I've actually hit a larger rock, and I'm not going to try to force that or anything. In the rest of the digging process, we'll get that out. It won't be any problem. Okay? So I'm just going to leave that and continue working. I hit it again there. Once you master this skill, you should try doing it slowly at first, but once you master this skill, you can begin to work very quickly and very rapidly. You see how fast I'm able to go. As you can see, we finished loosening the top 12 inches of our entire bed. Did you notice how easy that was? The tool does all the work essentially when you use these techniques correctly. Notice that we didn't have to do what some people do when they use a fork. We didn't have to get the load of soil, pick it all the way up, and turn it over, and all of that kind of thing. That's just not necessary. This is just simply a pre-loosening process, and it gets us ready for the next step where we're going to actually dig the soil with the spade, and you'll see, we'll do that one step at a time. I just want you to notice how easy it is and what we don't have to do. Okay? Now that we've pre-loosened, we don't want to go walk over it again and compact it right back. So we're going to use a digging board, which is nothing more than a piece of half-inch plywood cut to the width of our bed, which is 4 feet by 2 feet, that we will step on, and it evenly distributes our weight so it doesn't recompact the soil. Now I'm going to position my wheelbarrow here in place, and we are going to now remove 1 foot of soil from the trench, 1 foot deep. And the blade of your spade is roughly about 1 foot. So we use that as a measuring tool, and we measure from the end of the bed back 12 inches on either side, and that's where you place your board. The front edge of this board now becomes a guide for us in cutting. We're going to actually open up a trench. And this first step is the only point at which we're actually going to take soil out and remove it. After this, it gets much easier. So now we're going to just take all of this soil out. It goes very, very easily because of that pre-loosening process. It's just a process of shoveling it out from the bed into the wheelbarrow. And I'm going to continue here until I've got all this soil out. And as soon as this trench is completely open up, there's a few finer points that I want to point out to you. Okay, actually at this point, our wheelbarrow has enough soil in it that I don't want to make it any fuller than that and get too heavy. So what we do with this is we are going to wheel this all the way around the other side of the bed and dump it in a pile there. And you will see when we get to the other end of the bed why we put it there. I won't tell you now. Some of you may figure it out. Now, when I dump it here, I don't want to dump it right up too close to the bed. I'm going to leave myself 2 or 3 feet of space, and I'm going to dump it back here in a pile. Okay, I want to position the wheelbarrow back up here, and I'm going to finish digging the last of this soil out. Now, the finer point that I mentioned is, you remember when we were edging all the way around the bed, that we were cutting that slight angle out into the pathway. At this point, it's important as we're digging our soil out to go ahead and dig that soil out at that angle. And in just a minute, I want you to come up real close and you can get a closer look at that. But I want to mention one other thing, that when you're digging here in the corners and edging it out, don't dig all the way up to your stake, because if you do, it's going to collapse. The string's going to pull it and it's going to collapse. So at this point, I'm just going to come up to within a couple of inches of the stake and leave some soil there to keep that stake anchored. And I will just cut my edge all along the end of the bed and all the way around. Now, I'll get this out of the way like this. Now that we've finished excavating our first trench, you can better see the edge that we've cut and excavated out here. We do it all the way around on all three sides here on this first trench. Also, you want to notice here that in the corners where the stakes are, I have not cut that out or edged that out. I've left soil all the way around there so that that stake will stay nice and firmly anchored and won't fall down in. The other thing that I want you to notice is that I've used my spade, which is 12 inches roughly, as a depth gauge, so that when the tread of my spade lines up with the surface of the soil, I know that I've dug my trench deep enough and it's time to quit. Now you can see why we removed the soil from the top 12 inches and opened this trench. It's just for one reason. It's so that I can do what I'm about to do right now, and that is we've gotten right down into the trench, and we're going to use our fork again and do exactly the same thing that we did in the top 12 inches. We're going to now loosen the bottom 12 inches of soil. I'm going to start right up here in the corner, and again it's going to be very similar as when we started edging, not edging, but when we started loosening in this first row earlier. I'm not going to be able to get all the way in, because if I did, the tines would hit up against the hard soil of the pathway. So I just go in as far as I can, and I'm actually starting to hit a few rocks. One of the nice things about this whole process is that it's a one-time thing, and in the process, any rocks that are in the soil, you just get a chance to pull them out through the digging process. And here are a few here that we got out as a result of opening up the first trench. Now, where I have hit right onto a rock, I'm going to come back an inch or so and see if I can't get my tines under and around it and very easily pry that rock out, okay? I've gotten under it, and let's see if we can. Sometimes you can get them pretty easily, and okay, it's starting to come now. You want to work it very gently. These are strong tools, but you don't want to force it. You see, I've actually pulled out a granite rock here that's breaking up, and once those rocks are out, they're out for good, and we've got them out 24 inches deep. And even if you're in a part of the country where you have frost heave and rocks are working themselves up from down deep, and it seems like your soil is growing rocks, it's not really. They're actually coming up from down deep. It will take years and years and years for any rocks to come from 3 feet deep into your growing zone again. Okay, I'm working up some more rocks here, and now that these rocks are out, the soil is loose, 24 inches deep, and in place of rocks, you've got soil. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that where you've got soil, where you used to have rocks, now your plants can set down roots there, and they're going to grow a whole lot better because they have bigger, stronger root systems that are going a lot deeper than before. Right now I'm just loosening up rocks here, pulling them out. Okay, now I'm going to come back just a couple of inches and in a little, bring it down. In a little more, bring it down. In a little more, and I'm going to have to work it in between these rocks. In, down, in and down, in and down. And now I'm going to pull the rocks up to where I can just pull them all the way out. And I'm going to do this all the way across, but I want to draw your attention to one thing. Okay, I'm going to be able to come back and maybe do one more spot here. In, down, and I'm hitting a rock. So I'm going to have to find the edge of that rock. If you ever get to the point where you hit really large rocks, sometimes, occasionally, you'll have to switch to the spade, which is a little bit stronger. And in some cases, I've even dug beds where we wound up with some boulders like that, and then we switched to a digging bar. But that's going to be pretty rare that you have to do that. Most times, just with these simple techniques, you can pull out even large rocks like this. This wasn't any much work at all. It's just the leverage action of the tool, and not forcing the tool, but just getting the tool underneath the rock and using the leverage just to pry it out. And once it's out, it's out. Okay? Now, you'll notice I can't go back any further because I'm clear up against the edge here. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around and I'm going to work back from the other side exactly the same way. And it will force me to have to actually step on what I've loosened up already, but that's just fine because once I'm finished, I'm going to step out of the trench and just come back and quickly re-loosen that part that I stepped on again, and we'll be through. I'll join you again when I finish this trench, and I'll show you what the next step is. Now that we've finished loosening the bottom 12 inches with our fork in the first trench, we're going to pull our digging board back another 12 inches. Again, I'm going to use the spade to measure the distance. Check it here on the other side, but you can also basically see if your board is square with the string. Now, the next skill is just absolutely simple. We're not going to have to actually dig any more soil out the way we did to make the first trench. All we're going to do is work in this pre-loosened soil and take little slices. When I say little slices, I'm talking about only about a couple of inches of soil at a time. Just slice it right off here with our spade and just scoot it forward into the first trench. Essentially what we're doing is we're opening up a second trench and taking the soil from there and filling it into the hole of the first trench. But we're doing it just a couple of inches at a time in this easy, pre-loosened, nice, moist soil, and it just goes so easy, it's almost no effort at all. I don't have to pick it way up or do anything. All I do is just kind of scoot it forward, let it slide right off the spade. Slice, scoot it forward, and let it slide off. And I'm done here. Now I'm just going to move over 1 foot and start the process again. Slice it off, slide it off, slice it off, and slide it off. I mean, it's not only easy, but this is really fun. I mean, it really is. I love this. I enjoy it. And of course, you might say, well, your soil is a little bit sandy here. Yes, it's true. If you have a heavier clay, you might have a few more clods. But since you did the pre-loosening process, it's actually just as easy. It's just that if you have a sandier soil like this, there's no clods at all. It's later on, you won't have as much work to do breaking clods. But the whole process is very, very simple. slice a couple of inches and just let it slide right off. Now some people will want to make believe that they're a typewriter and instead of working their way all the way back and then moving their way over 1 foot, they'll just take a slice off here and then take a slice off here and they'll go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's too much work. Do it the easy way. Just work all the way back to the digging board, then move over, take your slice off, let it slide off. Now you'll notice that in order to get all of the soil out of the way of this second trench, you'll actually have to throw some of the soil a little bit outside of the bed into the path area. That's just fine. Okay, now at this point, to finish cleaning out my trench, I'm going to get down on 1 or 2 knees so that I can get down low and just finish shoveling this out. But again, I'm not going very far. I'm not having to throw this way out or into wheelbarrow. I'm just scooping up this loose soil and just emptying it out just 1 foot away, right here like this. Very, very easy. Another thing that it's useful to learn how to do is how to switch hands. Okay, it's a little bit awkward at first, but once you learn, it's no problem. Switch hands, and then you can work this way into this corner of the bed and scoop the soil out of there. Remember to cut your edges out. Okay, on both sides, cut your edge. Okay, scoop the last of that soil out, like that. Don't worry that it's falling out. If you turn up any rocks, pick them up, throw them out, and then you're ready to get your fork, get down in the bottom, and loosen it again. And now we're just going to continue this simple process, 1 trench at a time, all the way back until we've reached the last trench. When we reach the last trench, I'll show you what we do next. Where we're on the very last trench, and I just want you to notice this good pile of rocks that we had. We had a really good time here pulling these rocks out, and you just be amazed at how easily they come out. And as you come across, you notice how the soil in the bed has been raising up. This is not because we've added any soil at all to this bed. This is simply because the digging process has added so much air down so deep that the soil actually raises up and we've created a raised bed. Now, after we have gotten here to the very last trench that we're just about to start, we no longer need the digging board. We can take it away and put it aside entirely because now we've got the firm pathway to stand on. And now you can also see why I emphasize that you don't want to dump your pile of soil right up against the end of the bed, because if you do that, then you're not going to have any place to stand. You're going to have to be stepping on top of your soil, which isn't going to be a good idea. So, this is exactly the same process as before, and we won't go through it again because you saw it already, but I just want to mention just a couple of things before I start on this. That, you know, this whole process really is so enjoyable. It just so happens that recently I haven't been getting enough exercise, I confess. I've been having to sit behind a desk at a computer and all the rest of it. And right now, after having dug through this bed with just this easy, gentle, repetitive motion exercise, there's someone that actually calls this lazy bed gardening because the process of digging, you know, there's really not a whole lot of effort involved in it. And then after you're finished, it's even more of a lazy process because you don't have to dig again. You just kind of come and put your plants in and all the rest of it. But through this easy, slow, gentle, repetitive motion exercise, my muscles feel so good and warm and limber. And I'm just feeling really good. You know, there are some people that pay lots of money to go to gyms and spas and get some of the health benefits that you get. It's not just exercise. As you come in contact with the soil, especially as I had to get down here and get my hands in the soil to pull the rocks out and everything, the soil has gentle electrical currents that are very, very healing and beneficial to the body. Besides that, the clay in the soil helps to pull toxins out of the body. It's very healthy and very healing. Again, there are wealthy people that pay lots of money to go and get clay mud baths to do the same thing, to get beautiful skin and clean bodies. But out here in the garden, you get everything along with the fresh air. There's a nice breeze blowing right now. The sun is shining. It's just such a beautiful, wonderful, therapeutic thing. I really don't want you to look at this as work. It's really just benefit after benefit after benefit. Why? Because it's the very occupation that God gave to us in the very, very beginning in the Garden of Eden. As soon as I finish this trench here, I'll show you what we do next with this pile of soil. You've probably figured it out already, though. As I'm finishing up this last trench, I just want to re-emphasize a couple of very, very important points in your technique here. We're down here getting ready to loosen this with the fork, and you're going to start just a few inches out from the edge, but at first you're only going to be able to go in a couple of inches, loosen, and that's all you're going to be able to do. If I try to go in any deeper and pull back, I can't do it because I'm hitting the hard compacted ground. Okay, so please don't force these tools. Be smart about it, because even though they're strong, you can, if you really force it, you can break a tine. And of course, if you do use cheaper tools, then it's even easier to break them. I'll just mention too that when you use cheaper tools, the work is actually harder. I couldn't understand that until the first time I got one of these tools in my hand. It's absolutely phenomenal. I talk about how easy this whole process goes. One of the reasons is because the tools are so good. The handles are longer than normal. You get the better leverage. They just have a feel in your hand that is just phenomenal. So I really, really encourage you that if you're going to be serious about your gardening, you're going to follow through these methods, get these good tools. Last a lifetime, and you'll use them even after you finish your beds. You'll find all kinds of other uses for them in the future. Okay, so after you have done that first couple of inches right up close, then you come back a few more inches, and it's in a little, down, in a little bit more, and down, and then you can put it all the way in and down, and this time I can bring it all the way in and down without hitting the edge. That's a very important point. Okay, now I've actually had finished loosening this before. As I step out, I'm going to just re-loosen this part that I had stepped on, like this. Okay, and one last thing that I want to point out before we fill this trench in for good. And that is, you remember, when you get to your end, you're not only going to be cutting your edge on this side and on that side, on the long side of your bed, but don't forget to cut your edge out on the end of the bed as well. And when we get further down in this process and get ready to put our transplants in, I'll explain to you just why that edge was so important. Maybe you can figure it out on your own. Okay, we're ready now to fill this trench back in. Now it becomes very obvious why this pile is here. If you hadn't figured it out already, it's because we ended up with this big open trench here at the end of this bed, and now we're going to use this soil that originally came from a first trench on the other end of the bed to fill it in. I'm going to go ahead and fill this all in, and then I'll explain to you the next step. Okay. You notice that as we finish up getting the last of the soil from that pile. You can't get it all with the spade, so you switch tools. These are the three main tools that you need in this whole gardening system. Especially digging is basically just the fork, the spade, and the rake. And the only other tool that we'll actually use today, besides the fact that we used a hammer to put our stakes in, will be a trowel to do our transplanting in a little while. Okay, you'll notice that there's a few problems that we're going to fix now. First of all, very commonly it happens that you wind up with not enough soil here on the end where you finished, and you always wind up with a situation where you had to throw your soil too far outside. When you have a lot of soil to move, you want to use your spade. So what we're going to do is just come along and get this soil and throw it down here to the other end where it's too low. All the way across here. If your bed was really, really long, then you might want to shovel this into a wheelbarrow and wheel it down. But in this case, since our bed is only 7 feet long, it's not a problem just to throw it down. And of course, this is just the first step. We're not finished yet. Going to get most of it inside the bed. Now we still got way too much soil on this end and not enough there. So we're going to use our spade to knock down soil from the high areas and bring it over into the low areas. Oh, I just remembered something else I need to tell you. I felt the ground move under me a little bit just now. And that's because, you remember how we edged out all the way around? Because of that, there's not much support underneath you if you step too close to the edge. So when you have an open trench, you never want to go and walk and stand right on the edge of the trench. If you do, you're going to collapse your pathway and you're going to be on your seat down in the hole. And even after you first dug here, because this soil is still so loose, if you, in the process of doing your final soil moving and shaping and raking and everything, if you come right up on the edge and stand, you're still in danger of creating a little sinkhole here. So for the first few days after you've dug a fresh bed, just be aware to stay out a few inches away from the edge as you're walking around it. Okay? That's an important point. Okay, now I'm going to come over here and get this high spot, bring it down to the end, still low in there. Let's see, where else? That's pretty good now. That's pretty good as far as a rough distribution. Now we're going to switch to our rake to do the final shaping. And I really enjoy this part, but this is actually a skill that takes probably the most practice because it's basically all in the eye-hand coordination. Now some people, when they build raised beds, they like to go out and buy lumber or some other material and build up the sides and then smooth the top off flat. And if that's what you prefer, then by all means go ahead and do that. There is so much room for individuality in gardening. What we share with you are basic universal principles that work everywhere and will give you the very best results. But then you can change the details to suit your personal preferences. One of the reasons I like the mounded shape that we're going to make is because it's cheaper. You don't have any other material to purchase. And not only that, but instead of winding up with a flat surface, we're going to wind up with a curved surface that gives us actually more planting area within the same bed. So when you're planting crops that are spaced closely together, you can actually get a slightly higher yield. The goal here is you start on one side, and you're going to leave your strings on because you still need those guidelines to be able to see where your the edge of your bed is on these long sides. On the end, it's no problem. You can eyeball that quite easily. And you're going to start here now with the tines of your rake just inside the string, and you're going to pull up and across, changing and modulating the pressure as you go so that you're knocking down the high spots, filling in the low spots, and starting to get this rough curve shape across your bed. Okay, we're going to come all the way across from one side like this, and when we've done that, now I'm going to come around the other side. I'm going to do exactly the same thing from this side. I'm going to start at the edge of the bed, pull the soil all the way up and across. All the way up and across, modulating my pressure so that I start to get this curved shape. Being careful not to step too close to the edge of the bed to cause a collapse. When you have a more sandy soil like this, you have to be even more careful because it collapses much more easily than a clay soil would. Okay, you can already begin to see the rough curvature of the bed. Now that we've done that, we're going to come and start to get our angle on the ends of the bed, like so. Come in from this side and get the angle here on a bed. Now we're going to rake along the length of the bed this way. Again, the goal is to knock down the high spots and fill in the low spots, working on developing this beautiful round mound of soil that I personally believe looks very, very beautiful even when it's just finished, just raw soil. Once you get your crops growing on it, and it's that just solid canopy of leaves and color, it's even more gorgeous. Okay, I come around to this other side now and continue to rake, and you notice I'm going back and forth, both pushing the soil and pulling it. I've got a clump of roots here that I don't really want. Also, I'm seeing a few rocks that I will carefully rake off the bed and out into the path area. Now this happens to be a sandy soil, as I've mentioned a couple of times before, and so it already has a very nice what they call tilth. Okay, it's just nice and loose and crumbly like that. But if you did have a clay soil, which is most of the places I've been, I've dealt with the clay, and if you refer back to your manual, you'll find out that clay is not a curse. It's actually a blessing, and you can turn that into just a wonderful, wonderful loose soil that's going to be able to hold more nutrients than a sandy soil can. But if you have a clay and you've got large and small clods here now over your bed, there's a couple of things that you can do to fix that. One of them is that you can rake them off down into the pathway, and then with your boots you just dance a little jig on them, stomp them, crush them, and then you can rake them back onto the bed. The other thing that you can do is use your fork and you do something that's called tilthing. Okay, tilth is a word that has to do with the structure of the soil. When soil has good tilth, it means it has a nice loose crumb structure, okay, like nice leavened bread or raised bread. Okay, for tilthing, you'll just hold your fork like this and you'll strike it sideways across the bed, just hitting the clods like this. And as you hit them sideways like this, they will just break and crumble. Okay, you don't want to hit directly straight down on the bed because you're going to be compacting the soil again too much. So it's just a sideways glancing blow like this to break up your clods. Either that or raking down into the path and stomping on them with your boots. Okay, well, I'm just going to fix this part that I messed up here again, and pretty much we have our basic shape, bed shape in place now, And just going to touch up a few spots that I see here. Pull any soil that's still outside the bed into the bed area. Get my nice, and you know, one of the points is that this shallow slope that you develop on the sides is shallow enough so that when you're watering or when it rains, there won't be strong erosion. You know, it won't wash. If the soil was almost straight up and down, then of course you'd have soil erosion. But here, because of the shallow slope, and also because the soil is loose and full of air, open pore structure now, this bed can just soak up inches of rain. And as a result, you can run these beds even straight down a significant slope. And the beds won't erode. They won't wash away unless you had, you know, a really bad hurricane that comes through that's going to take your house and everything else away. But under any normal circumstances, it's not going to erode or cause any problems. Okay? That's it as far as our shaping. I just want you to come in from the end so that you can just kind of get an idea of what this shape looks like from the end of the bed. As you're looking in from the end of the bed now, you can see the gentle curvature of the bed. And because this is a sandier soil, the raising up or the loft of the bed is rather modest. But in the case of a clay soil, it actually raises up a lot more because more air can fit in between all of the tinier particles of clay. Well, this is really exciting. We're almost finished. We've got a beautifully shaped bed here that we're never going to have to go through that process again like that. At this point, we're done with our strings, so we can go ahead and get them out of the way, and so that we won't be tripping on them or anything, or stumbling. We'll just put them aside, and we're ready at this point to apply our amendments. Now you want to refer to your manual for details and everything concerning the mixing and application of your amendments. You will have weighed them out and mixed and blended them before you get out here to the garden. I like to actually do my mixing in a Ziploc bag. After I've gotten my amendments in the bag, I'll actually make sure I've got some extra air in the bag, zip it shut, and then you can just thoroughly mix and homogenize those amendments back and forth like that. That's very important because sometimes you're going to have just a fraction of an ounce of a trace element like copper or zinc or molybdenum. It's kind of hard to say that one. And you need the larger amounts of calcium and other things that you're going to be putting on to give enough volume of material to distribute over the bed evenly. But you want that tiny amount of material to be evenly spread throughout that entire mix. So you want to thoroughly mix and homogenate. Okay? Now, because some of the chemicals involved in these amendments can be a little bit irritating to the skin, I like to wear a pair of latex surgical gloves. Actually, I only need one because I'm only going to be handling it with one hand. Some people want to use one of those little hand crank spreaders or something like that, but I have found, and other gardeners have found, that when you're trying to put on your amendments in a very precision way, as we're doing here, there's nothing that beats the machinery of the human hand. It's very important. We've weighed out these amendments to the precise amount that we need for this particular square footage of this bed, okay? And we need the same amount of amendments everywhere because we don't want to develop a richer soil on this end of the bed and a more deficient soil on the other end of the bed. So the goal here, as we grab a handful of amendments, we hold them with our hand loosely clenched like this, and then with a rapid flicking of the wrist back and forth, you see the powder fine amendments just come out very evenly across the surface of the bed. Now what you want to do is you want to deliberately go too fine to begin with. In other words, you don't want to put too much on it first. Go thin. Go thin on the first go around. From one side of the bed you can do one end, and you come around to the other side, and you continue to spread all the way around. Okay? Then, after you've gotten a good supply fairly evenly all over the bed, and you've still got some left in your bag, then you're going to come back again and fill in the thin spots until you've got a good even amount everywhere. It's important that you go too thin at first, because if you get too overconfident and try to get it all on the first go, what will happen is you'll get almost all of it on 2/3 of the bed or a half of the bed, and you've run out, and you don't have anything more to put on the rest of the bed. And guess what? You can always put more on, but once it's down, you can't get it up. Okay? So, guess what? I'm talking from experience. Experience really is a good teacher, but there's a better teacher. It's wisdom. Learn from the wisdom and mistakes of others, and you can get out there and do a much better job more quickly than I could have if I didn't know what I was doing in the very beginning. Okay, we've got a few more thin spots here on the side. We're going to fill in. We've just got a little bit more in our bag. We're going to look for the thinnest areas to get it, so that we're developing the same kind of soil, the same level of nutrients and fertility everywhere, because we don't want to be a respecter of plants and overfeed our plants on this side and underfeed them on this side. Almost through here. That's it. And if you come up and take a real close look on that bed, you'll see that instead of being that nice dark color now, you've got this kind of an ash gray. That's the mixture of all the different rock dusts and chemical amendments that are in here, and it's pretty evenly spread all over the bed. And you see that only took just a couple of minutes to do. It's not a difficult process at all, and I almost guarantee you that you could not do such an even job with one of those crank applicators or a drop spreader. A drop spreader doesn't work on a bed like this at all. Okay? Use that on your lawn and other places. There are places to use those tools, but here your hands are really, really the best, guaranteed. Okay? Now, if you have followed the instructions as far as the soil, taking your soil sample as we described before and in your manual, and you took your soil sample from a depth of 12 inches, then the goal is now that you're going to mix these amendments in a full 12 inches, because we're going to be building and balancing the soil 12 inches deep. In order to do that, our tines are 12 inches, so we just sink our fork into this lovely, loose, fluffy soil. I mean, this is just so easy, it's a delight. It's so good. Feels so good. All the way across, we're going to mix them in, and after I have finished mixing all the way across, then I'm going to come back with my rake and do a final shaping of the bed. When we get to that point, I want to invite you to come back and we'll show you what the next step is. Okay, I've got my trusty board here because we're going to use that in the next skill, which is very important. But before we move on to that skill, I just want to mention something. Many people sometimes wonder why go through the process of raking twice after we had finished digging the bed. Why rake before we put on the amendments and then mess it up again and have to come back and rake again? Well, the answer is really very simple, because if you remember, after we'd finished digging and moving the soil around with our spade, there was a really rugged surface there with hills and valleys and all kinds of things like that. And with that kind of a surface, when we're trying to spread our amendments very evenly across the whole bed, what would happen is that the amendments would all fall off of the high spots into the low spots, and you would not get an even spread of amendments across the whole bed. By just taking a couple of minutes and raking the bed roughly smooth, then spreading them as we did, we got a good, even spread and mix of our amendments, which is really, really very important. And then it only took a couple of more minutes just to rough shape it again. Now, in the process of our dig, we have actually mixed in so much air that there's too much. It's actually going to collapse. The soil will collapse again as we put water on it, as it rains, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our same digging board, and it now becomes a tamping board. And we're going to lay it across our bed, and we're going to just walk across it, and it distributes our body weight evenly. It doesn't compact the bed completely again down to ground level, but it takes the excess air out so that when we water, it's not going to collapse unevenly, because that's what will happen. If you don't do this, the collapsing from the water will create holes and unevenness. The other thing that happens when you do this, as you notice here, the part that we've done already, it just creates a beautiful, smooth planting surface. You notice something that I have to do. I start off with my board on this edge. I'm walking across, and because of the loft of the bed, it doesn't reach all the way quite to the end, and I have to pull it down a little. And when you have a bed that raises up even more than this, you'll have to make that even more of an adjustment. Okay, this is the last one. Got to pull it down, do this last little portion, then I'll come, bring it down to the end, and do my end like so, and I'm done. Gardening is great. When you get to this point, you can even sit down on the job. This is probably the most enjoyable part of the whole process, second only possibly to my favorite part of all, and that's eating the finished product. I'm sure everybody likes that the best. That's the wonderful thing about this, you know, this is not just exercise for exercise sake, like when you go to the gym or put on your jogging shoes. I mean, this is exercise with a purpose. And as I said, this is a permanent bed now. And we're never going to have to go through that process again if you follow all the rest of the system that's detailed out in your manual. You should never have to do that again. The most you'll ever have to do probably for another 6 years is once a year in the beginning of the spring to get your fork and come and just lightly fluff the surface. And of course you may need to incorporate some more amendments, and you saw how easy that is because this ground is just so light and loose and fluffy now. Okay, well, even though we started some of our own seedlings, they weren't ready yet, so we just went out and purchased some of the regular ones in the cell packs, which is fine to get started. In fact, if you're a really, really beginning gardener, I really recommend that you do just go ahead and purchase to begin with until you get your skills up to par and you know how to start your own without a lot of loss. You'll get even better results then. And it's a lot cheaper to start your own. The basic tools that we need are going to be a trowel. In this case, because the root ball is going to be fairly large, I'm going to use a full-size trowel. But in many cases, especially when you're transplanting out of flats, you might have seedlings that are small enough that you want a smaller, narrower transplanting trowel like this that are available in different styles in different places. Today we won't use that, so we'll just set that aside. The other thing that we'll need is a spacing stick. You notice here that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 laid out. This is 3 inches. This is I think 4 inches here, 9 inches, and 12 inches. There are other spacing distances. Refer to the back of your manual. There's a chart there that tells you exactly what the spacing distances are that are optimum for intensive planting on the hexagonal spacing that's explained in your manual. If you're used to conventional row planting, you're not going to want to use the spacings that you're accustomed to. They're going to be different, okay? So do check your manual. In this case, we're planting leaf lettuce. If we were going to plant these to fully mature and produce heads, we would plant them about 6 inches apart. But there's another thing that you can do with leaf lettuce, and that is you can plant it as close as 3 inches apart, very, very close, and then you harvest it on a cut and come again basis. And again, that is explained in more detail in your manual. In this case, this is a romaine lettuce. It does okay on cut and come again, but it makes really nice heads too. So we'll go ahead and transplant this out on a 6-inch spacing. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to start in on one corner, and you're going to find your halfway point on your measuring stick, and you're going to come halfway in from the end of the bed and halfway in from the side of the bed and make your mark. That's where the first plant is going to be. Now, why are we making it only 3 inches in half of the distance instead of the full 6? The reason is that those spacings are based so that when those plants are mature, the leaves are going to just barely touch, okay? So if you were to transplant your first one the full distance in, you're not going to fill out your bed completely. At least that's the theory. But you'll find that as your soil gets better and better and better, that these plants get so big and grow so luxuriantly and profusely that they can even almost spill over into the pathway area. If you only have a 2-foot path, gets to the point where you can hardly see the path sometimes with some crops. And that's not going to happen with lettuce, okay, but it will happen with some other crops. Okay, now I'm going to share with you a very, very beautiful skill that I learned from another master gardener of how to do this transplanting with a trowel very, very quickly and efficiently. Instead of holding the trowel in the regular way like you would like this, you're going to hold it more like a dagger, okay? And there's just a few simple motions involved in this process, okay, without any wasted motion so that you can get on with the job. Because, you know, when you do things more efficiently, not only don't you waste time, but it's actually more fun, and you can get on to the other activities that you have to do in your life. Because even though it's a lot of fun out here, let's face it, you don't want to be doing nothing but gardening all day long, every day. Okay? So you're going to thrust the spade straight down, then push back, pull straight forward, and that has opened up your hole now. Now you're going to drop your seedling in to about the point where it was before. Especially with lettuce, you want to make sure that the crown inside here is not covered up with soil, or you don't get any soil dropping down inside here because it will rot. Okay? There are certain other things like tomatoes and squash vines and things like that that you'll actually bury a large part of the stem all the way up to the first 2 leaves. Okay? But in this case with lettuce, we're only going to bury it to the same point of where it was before. Okay? Put it in. Now you're going to lift your trowel out, and without putting it down, you're just going to take your thumb and forefinger and the end of the trowel and make one gentle thrust forward to close the hole up and establish root-soil contact. Then you're going to stick out a couple of fingers here and come around on one side and around on the other side, and that forms a nice little round crater there so that you can come and put water on just as soon as possible. That's really very, very important to avoid transplant shock. You want to make sure that your seedlings have been thoroughly watered beforehand. You want to make sure that your bed is thoroughly moist. And this time of year where it's cool, it's not so critical, but especially when you get into the warmer part of the year, you want to make sure you get water on them very quickly. Also, for the best transplanting time, refer to your manual. Okay? Now, here's where I'm going to use the spacing stick. We measure across the width of the bed, or 6 inches, make a mark, get the next one, straight down, back, pull forward to open up the hole, drop the seedling in, thrust straight forward, make my hole all the way around, and you're done. Okay? The next one is going to go here, down, back, forward, in, thrust, hole. See how fast this goes? Okay? Measure my next one across, down, back, forward, drop it in, thrust, make my little circle. Now, I'm not going to finish out that row yet because I want to show you what happens on the next 2 rows here. I'm going to pull my board back just a little bit to make a little bit more room. By the way, why am I sitting on this board? Well, obviously, because I don't want to compact that bed again. The board, again, is distributing my weight evenly so I can sit comfortably and work in here without creating any compaction. Okay, now on the second row, I'm going to be measuring from both the first and from the second plants. From here and from here, creating an equilateral triangle, and there's my mark. That's where that plant is going to go. And you'll find that however many plants fit in the first row, there's going to be usually one less on the second row. They won't be actually equal, okay? So down, back, forward, drop it in, thrust it, make my little hole. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the next one. Now I can measure from this plant that I just put in and from this other one in the first row, and that's where the plant is going to go. Down, back, pull straight forward, open up my hole, drop it in, making sure that I don't go too deep because this is lettuce and I don't want the soil to get in and rot the crown. Okay? Now, again, I'm not going to finish out that row because I want you to see what happens on the third row. We develop a little problem here. It's not a problem if you know what to do. Because this second row started in a little bit more staggered than the first one, my next plant is going to be in line with this one. It's going to be somewhere over here. But guess what? I've only got one plant to measure from, so I don't know exactly where to put it. So I skip that one. I don't do it first. I come in and plant what's going to be the second plant in a row because I've got 2 lettuces here to measure from. So I go from here and from here, and I know that that's where that lettuce plant is going to go. And I put it in, down, back, forward, drop it in, gentle thrust, make my circle, and now I've got these 2 plants here that I can measure from. What did I do with my stick? Rolled away from me. Okay? Now I can measure from this plant and from this one, and I know exactly where to put it. Down, back, forward, drop it in, thrust, circle, and that is essentially it. You'll continue to plant on out as much as you need of that particular crop. Now, you don't have to fill your whole bed with one crop. Maybe you'll only have 1 or 2 feet of this variety of lettuce. Then maybe you want a red lettuce. And then maybe you want another crop entirely. I want to just plant a few of these red cabbages here, not only for the beautiful color contrast, but also to show you what I was talking about as far as burying them and planting them a little bit differently than we do the lettuce. As I said, we're going to space it out a full 12 inches away so that as these lettuce and cabbage grow up, they won't crowd each other out too badly. Again, we start halfway in from the edge. So my first plant is going to go right here, down, back, pull straight forward, and this time I'm going to drop it all the way into the first 2 set of leaves. Okay? Like that. Let's do just 1 or 2 more. This time it's going to be 12 inches apart. There's where my second one goes. And in this case, I've actually got a couple of leaves that are pretty anemic. They're dying. They're dead. So I'm going to pull them off. I'm actually going to pull these off too. And all of this stem that's buried, this will all develop roots. Okay? And the new stem that comes up there will be much stronger than the little spindly part that's down here at the bottom. Okay? Down, back, pull straight forward, drop it all the way in to those first two sets of leaves there now. Thrust it, make my little hole, and there we've got it. Okay? So that's basically the process right there. I also want to now mention to you why it is that when we were edging and digging, we made sure to cut out at an angle into the pathway. Well, by now, some of you smart ones have already figured it out. It's really quite simple. The reason is that the plants that are here towards the center of the bed have nice, loose soil all the way around 360 degrees, and they will grow to their full potential. But with these plants that are very, very close to the edge, if we had edged straight down, what's going to happen is on this side, the roots have lots of loose soil that they can roam as far as they want. But when they get here, they're going to suddenly hit compacted earth, and the roots of plants are not drill bits. They will take the easiest or the path of least resistance, okay? And you will literally see that the plants on the side will be stunted and not as large and productive in growth, so this affects your overall yield in the end. Okay, so that's the reason. By edging that out into the pathway, you've got nice loose soil, even out here for about 3 to 6 inches out here into the pathway, down underneath, those roots can be growing out and taking advantage of nice loose soil under here as well. Okay, in just a minute, I'm going to go and get my watering wand and show you how easy it is to water these beds. There are automatic types of watering systems that you can use with these beds if you are gardening on a huge commercial scale. But for the average backyard gardener, nothing can beat hand watering with a watering wand. And the reason for that is very, very simple. We go into it in the manual and you can read that in more detail. But with your human eye, you can apply the water exactly where it's needed. Sometimes you'll have one side of the bed that has had a southern exposure and has dried out more. You can apply more water there. And where it doesn't need water, you can put less. This can add up to a lower water bill if you have to pay for your water. Even if you pump it out of a well, it's electricity, whatever. So you're conserving natural resources. And if you hadn't heard recently, water is pure water is getting to be a scarcer and scarcer commodity in the earth today. So you want to practice conservation. The other thing is that as you get out here at least once a day, your garden becomes a beautiful place. You'll want to be there. You don't have the problem with weeds and everything, and this color and the beauty of nature all around. You'll want to be there. It's a wonderful place to pray, to meditate, but you'll want to be paying attention to your little babies and making sure that they're okay, seeing to all of their needs, not only water, but noticing when they're ready to harvest, noticing whether there might be some kind of pest problem developing. In the process of building your soil, sometimes you still might have an occasional problem. And if you get in there and bring about corrective measures early on, you'll have much better results. So the watering time is my favorite time to be out there, to observe the garden, and also to meditate, to unwind after a stressful day of work, or just to pray and to spend time with God in nature. Okay? A watering wand is wonderful because you can, from standing in one position, easily reach all areas of your bed. Even a much longer bed, you won't have to move about very much. Okay? You want to direct an even spray, not too fast, but the secret is to keep the wand moving. Don't let it stay in one spot too long because it will begin to pool, and puddle and run off faster than it can go in. Okay? The principle with watering is ideal. I mean, not ideal. The principle is the same as with spreading the amendments. You want even moisture. You want the same amount of moisture everywhere, just like we wanted the same amount of nutrition everywhere. Okay? Because this soil was already so well moistened prior to our digging process, I really couldn't put on very much without it already beginning to run off. You can see a spot here where it started to begin to run. There was another one on the other side where it began to run. That's why I cut it off immediately. If this was drier, it would take much more water before it would begin to run off. Also, as you begin to build up your organic matter and your structure, you'll find that you'll have open pores, and the water will go into the soil much more rapidly and easily without any running at all. Now, if you happen to have a type of a soil that the water won't penetrate, it's kind of stubborn and it won't go in even after you've double dug with the slope on the sides, a very easy solution is that you spread an organic mulch like straw, alfalfa hay, or something else like that, and the mulch will help to hold the water from running off the sides and will help it to soak in. That's a solution that I found in some cases. Again, refer back to your manual for the details on the watering. Just mention that you know when to stop, even before the water runs off, by the sheen that develops on the surface. Let me just put a little water on this spot so you see what I mean. Okay? You see how the water is starting to sit on the surface there, and it's not going straight in, develops that sheen. When you begin to see that, you know you've got saturation. Okay? There's a lot more subtleties and fine details that I won't go into now. They're in your manual. Refer back to those points because they are very, very important if you want to get the very, very best results in your garden. Is a high-powered liquid food and biostimulant for both crops and soil. It is completely unique to the Bionomic growing system, and it's a big part of the reason for the super nutrition to be found in Bionomic produce. When the soil minerals have been built up and balanced and air has been incorporated deep in the soil, Sprout Blend causes a literal explosion of the beneficial soil microbes that manufacture vitamins and complex organic nutrients in the soil. These are then taken up by the plants. Microbes often bloom in the soil to the point of becoming visible with the naked eye. During the summer of 2000, we contracted a food lab in San Francisco to test Bionomic lettuce versus store-bought organic lettuce. The beta-carotene in the Bionomic lettuce was twice the level of the organic lettuce, and vitamin C was close to 6 times as high. Before you use this powerful product in your garden, please do read the warning in your manual. Used correctly, Sprout Blend is a powerful product, but misused, it could actually become dangerous to you. Please refer to the manual and follow it closely. Actually, making Sprout Blend is the height of simplicity. All you're going to need is a jar, container, or something to hold the seed as you sprout it. Usually I use 5-gallon buckets. In this case, we've used a glass jar so that you can see the process a little bit better. You're going to use a blend of different grains. Refer to your manual for details. Here we have 4 different grains that we're going to add to our container. That's the first one. Second one will go in. The third. And the fourth. Once they're all in, we're going to cover these with a volume of water twice as much, at least, as the amount of grain that we've put in. The reason for that is that as seeds sprout, as some of you will know if you do sprouting at home, they literally double in volume. That's all we're going to do for now. We're going to actually put this into a cool, dark place. 70 degrees is optimum. Again, all of the details are in your manual. Please refer back to that. We'll come back in 8 hours, which is the optimum length of time for the soaking process, and we'll show you what to do from there. Well, it's 8 hours later. Our seeds have been soaking now and have about doubled in volume, and it's time to pour the soak water off. And instead of just pouring it down the drain as you would if you were sprouting for human consumption, we're going to save it in a bucket because every seed is covered with the beneficial microbes and bacteria that are good for the soil and good for your plants. And you're going to be inoculating the soil with this sprout blend mixture as well as feeding it. And so we're going to save this water. We've put a colander into our bucket here because you notice as we're pouring it off, we're losing some of our seeds. And so that keeps it from going down into the bucket. You want to make sure that you get every last bit of water out, because if there's still water and I turn this jar back over, again, it's going to pool in the bottom. And where the seeds are sitting in water, they're going to drown and they're going to die. They need air to breathe. They're actual living organisms just like you and I. Now I'm going to take the seeds, the grain that is in the colander, and we're going to get this back into the jar. Okay, we've got our seeds back in, but you see how they're sticking onto the sides. And so I'm just going to tap that jar and make sure that they're all knocked down. Might even just push a few stubborn ones down by hand, because if they're left up here, they're going to dry out, and again, they're going to die as a result because they need both air and water. Now, we're going to cover them to make sure that we don't get too much loss of moisture through evaporation, and also to block out excess light, because the best development of vitamin content and so on happens actually in low light or even in dark. So we're going to cover this, put it in a cupboard or a dark area, and we'll come back and rinse these morning and evening until they have reached the point at which we're going to stop the sprouting process. We'll show you that later. Well, our grain is in the process of sprouting. And it's important to realize that this sprouting process is a living process. The grain needs continual moisture. That's why we're going to rinse at least twice a day, morning and evening, to keep it from drying out. Another important reason for the rinsing is that in the process of sprouting and growing, these seeds are generating heat, just like animals and humans do in the process of living. The soap water helps to cool the seeds down. But because we're using the same soak water over and over to rinse twice a day over a period of a couple of days, sometimes the water can get so warm that it's not doing its job of cooling the seeds down adequately. And the seeds get too hot, they'll actually begin to cook themselves. And so in that case, we're not going to keep our soak water in the bucket. We're going to pour it off into a nice pitcher. This is actually a product that is called Rejuvelac in human health circles, and you could actually use this internally to help to replenish the beneficial microbes in your intestinal tract. So you don't have to worry about putting in your refrigerator. This is absolutely good food for both your garden and even for you if you wanted to use it. So we're going to take this and put it in the refrigerator right now so that it will stay nice and cool. Now that our soak water, which is now our rinse water, has been nicely chilled, we're going to use it to do our rinsing. It's just a simple process of pouring that water back over the sprouts. And now we've got a small strainer to catch the grain as we pour the water back off. Again, making sure that we get every last drop of water out of the jar, the bucket, or whatever container that you're using
so that there won't be a pool of water at the bottom causing the seeds to drown. Okay? It's still flowing. So I'm going to get every last bit out. And there, it's stopping now. And so we can turn it back. Make sure you get all the water out of the strainer. Dump that grain back. Well, our sprouts are all ready for blending. The way you know is by looking at the length of the little roots that come out. If you come up close, you can see here that the little roots that are coming out are roughly averaging around about 1/4 of an inch in length, or maybe 1/8 of an inch, between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch in length. The reason we stop the sprouting process at that point is that between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch length of root is where the enzyme levels of these grains and legumes are at the very highest level. That's very important, as we mentioned in the manual, and I won't go into the details of that again. Just refer back to your manual to understand the importance of the enzymes. Enzymes are destroyed at very low heat levels, and so we want to be aware as we get ready to start our blending process that we don't let it get too hot. We're going to want to use cold water. In fact, it wouldn't even hurt if you had a few ice cubes in there, because you don't want that temperature to get much above 100 degrees, because you're going to start to get some destruction on your enzymes. Now, I found that the best proportions for blending in any kind of blender at all will be 1 cup of finished sprouts to 2 cups of water. And in this case, we've got a Vitamix, which is a really high-powered blender and does a very, very good job of liquefying the sprout blend. But you can even use a regular kitchen blender. The only difference is that the finished product may not be quite as liquefied, and you might need to strain the finished product, or you might need to just make sure that whatever you're using to water the finished sprout blend onto your garden has large enough holes in the rows that the solid material can go right through. Okay? I always like to start my blender down on a lower speed so it doesn't just kick up too badly, and then I'll go up to full high speed. That's gone long enough. You can tell easily because we've got a beautiful white liquid. It hasn't gotten too hot. And if you come in real close, you'll see that it looks almost just like beautiful frothy milk. That is finished sprout blend. Now, I want to point out one other thing to you. If you make enough sprout blend in one batch at a time so that you have extra left over, because as you'll see when we go outside, this little bit of sprout blend is going to be diluted, and it will cover quite a significant area. So these sprouted grains will last for a while. What you can do is, with the extra that you don't put onto your garden or to your flats right away, you can measure it out in 1 cup batches in little Ziploc bags, and these can go right into your freezer. Then, next week, if you do it on a 1-week schedule or a 2-week schedule, all you have to do is go to your freezer, pull out your frozen sprout blend, put it right into your blender with the water, and in just a few seconds, you have finished sprout blend. So you don't have to go through the entire sprouting process every single week, even if you're on a 1-week application schedule. The simplest way to apply sprout blend to your beds evenly and precisely is with a simple plastic 2-gallon watering can In this case, you want a rose that's not going to be too fine. You want the holes to be large enough so that if you have any solid matter that didn't get thoroughly liquefied and blended in the blending process, it'll still go right through. What we're going to do is we're going to pour this sprout blend into the bottom. Actually, you'll find that there's a little bit of foaming. You'd think that it would almost be better to put the water in first and the sprout blend second, but I still will put it in first because then as I put my water in and fill it up, it thoroughly mixes at the same time. I don't have to come behind and stir it. Okay, so we're going to fill this up, and what I have applied here has been 1 cup of sprout blend to 2 gallons of water. That's a good average dilution rate for many circumstances, but your manual has very detailed application rates for different soils, different crops, and different situations. Make sure that you refer back to those application charts, and by all means, I can't say it too many times, please pay attention to the warnings as far as over application of this very, very powerful product. Okay, once you have mixed it, it's just a simple process of applying it evenly. You want to keep it moving, and you want to get the same amount of this material on all parts of the bed. 2 gallons is actually enough to cover 50 square feet of bed. This little bed here is not 50 square feet, so I'm not going to put on the entire 2 gallons, but I'm going to make sure I've got as much on this side as I put on the other side. As long as your potting mix has all the other nutrients that it needs, sprout blend is a fantastic supplemental food and growth stimulant for your seedlings too. So you can apply it on a regular basis throughout the 30 days that your seedlings are going to be growing. But one thing that you want to pay attention to is if you do wind up getting a contamination with the fungus that causes damping off disease, you'll know when you have it because you'll see your little seedlings just keel over and die. You want to stop the sprout blend right away because it's going to be feeding that fungus as well as the other microbes, and you want to start using ideally a 6% hydrogen peroxide solution. Put it in a little pump spray bottle. What you do is you go to a health food store or some other place where you can get 35% food grade hydrogen peroxide, dilute that down to a 6% solution, spray that on, it will kill the damping off disease. Another thing that you can use is a dilute chamomile tea. I believe the details of this are all in your manual as well. Both the chamomile tea and the hydrogen peroxide solution are completely natural products that you can use that will absolutely kill and knock out this damping off disease. Applying the sprout blend onto the flat is exactly the same principle as putting onto the bed. You just want to make sure that you get an even amount over your entire flat. You could actually substitute water with sprout blend in it at least once or twice a week in place of your regular watering. Don't overdo it though, because then you will encourage fungal growth and problems. That's basically all there is to it. Very simple. I hope you've enjoyed watching this educational video as much as we've enjoyed putting it together. Knowledge doesn't really become full understanding until you put it into practice. So I want to encourage you to get outdoors as soon as you can to start preparing your soil to feed your plants with the highest levels of health-giving nutrition possible. As you do, you'll see, feel, taste, and experience the positive impact the Bionomic system can make on your physical, mental, and spiritual. Hi, welcome to our miracle garden. You know, there are so many miraculous things that take place in the garden, but the one that I enjoy the most is the harvest. Getting to see the fruits of my own labor, not just see them, but to be able to taste them. There are so many things in the garden that parallel the things in the spiritual life. And when we think of the harvest, we think of the harvest that Jesus wants to come and receive, not only from the world, but from us. He's just waiting to be able to reach down into our lives and to pluck the fruit and to taste. That is good. That is sweet. That is wonderful. Jesus wants to be able to do that with us. Well, listen, I want to show you a couple of tips on how to harvest some of these things. We have some green beans here. And one of the things with green beans is that you want to make sure that you don't just grab the bean and tug on the whole plant, because the stems of the plant are rather delicate and you will pull the whole thing up. You'll break it, you'll snap whole branches off, and then you shorten your harvest, because these beans will continue to flower and they'll continue to put on fruit for quite a while as long as you keep them fed. So what you want to do is one or two things. Either just use your thumb and forefinger to snap them off like this, or you can hold the plant with one hand and pull them off, just like this. Come on down here, and I want to show you these golden wax beans. They're really pretty. They tend to be not quite as hardy as some of the other beans. They tend to sometimes be a little bit more susceptible to disease, but with good soil management and so on, you shouldn't have any problem. But they are beautiful yellow color. I like the differences in color. One of the things I like about growing my own vegetables is there's so many varieties, so many colors, so many new flavors to try and to experiment with, to add more color, texture, flavor to your table. You won't ever see these things in the grocery store. This is one of my favorite beans right here. It is the Royal Burgundy bean. You see that beautiful deep burgundy color? This stays this color as long as it's raw. And you can use them raw and cut up in salads if you want. They're just fine that way, tender and good. But if you cook them in a stir fry or some other favorite way, then they turn green, just like the others. Really, really neat. We're going to be showing you a little bit more about how to harvest some other types of vegetables in just a minute, but we're going to take a short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back. We're talking about extending our seasons so that we can grow crops in season and out of season. You know, the scripture says that we're to be instant in season and out of season, and there's a lot of benefits for having instant harvest of fresh food to put on your table in all the seasons. We've taken off that floating row cover that we demonstrated to you before so that you could get a better view of the plants here. And now we're going to get ready to put our greenhouse plastic here. And Bruce, why don't you come over here on this side? Give me a hand. Thanks. Bruce has been a real blessing. He's one of our interns who has come and joined us because he sees the importance of knowing how to do this far more thoroughly than he was able to learn in just a couple of days of instruction before. We're going to finish rolling this on out to the very end. And you notice that we've cut this plastic, which is UV inhibited plastic, so that it will last. I think this is about 3-year plastic. You don't want to get the ordinary kind of plastic you just pick up at one of the department stores, because after a single season, the ultraviolet radiation from the sun is going to just break it down into horrible shreds, and you're going to have a terrible cleanup job. So it's worth the extra investment just to buy this. You'll probably have to get it mail order. And now we're opening it up. As you can see, and you see the greenhouse starting to take shape already. The next thing is that we're going to secure the bottom. You can just use rocks that you have. There are also other hold-down implements or that you can get commercially, but rocks are good and cheap. As you see, Bruce is putting them down all along the sides, and we're kind of just doing a quickie job here just so that you can get the idea. If you're at home, you understand that you're going to want to fold these ends in much more neatly and take a little more time and put more rocks in, but essentially you see the greenhouse here. There's another method that you can use, in fact. Would be a little difficult for us because we have a rock mulch in our pathways, but if you have just a dirt pathways, you could actually dig a little shallow trench right down the side, bury the plastic in, and bring the dirt back over, and that'll hold it down. I prefer to have rocks or some other thing because one of the things you're going to want to do is on a warm day. You may have very cold nights, but in some parts of the country it warms up a good bit in the daytime. And you'll be surprised how even on a fairly cool day, underneath this plastic, it gets quite warm. So you want to keep a monitor on that, and you'll want to come out on a warm day and roll up the sides of your plastic, and then you can fasten it. There are clips that you can either purchase or make yourself out of larger PVC with a slit here, and there are several different ways that you can fasten. You can use your ingenuity. Now, this is winter protection, but the same PVC hoops can be used in the summer if you have heat-sensitive crops like lettuce and other things that don't like the heat too much. And here we have a commercial shade cloth, and instead of stretching out plastic, we can stretch this shade cloth over the same framework, and we can have a shade house. Another trick to shading heat-sensitive crops in the winter so that you can have cool-loving crops in the summertime when they don't usually like to grow is by planting your bed plantings in such a way so that a tall crop like corn or tomatoes is shading your bed, or pole beans or something like that. You may also want to make a special bed under the shade of a tree. That way you don't have to even purchase shade cloth. There are many, many different ways that you can go about it. Now, how about starting your seedlings at times when the weather is doing fairly extreme things? Well, you can make a little mini greenhouse like this, or a mini shade house in a open spot in your yard or your garden off to the side where there isn't a bed growing, and you can start your seedlings in your flats right under the shade or the greenhouse protection as well. There's something else that I want to show you, and it's just over behind us here. So I want to invite you just to come around the other side of the greenhouse, and I want to show you another little trick that you can do if you have really, really severe weather. Welcome back for our final tip. You know, mini greenhouses, shade houses, larger greenhouses are all excellent means of extending your season so that you can grow in more months out of the year. But there's something even more fundamental than that. Just simply by selecting the best varieties of vegetables for your garden, you can do much the same thing. You see, there are varieties that are naturally more heat tolerant. There are others that are more frost tolerant. I want to share with you a very wonderful resource. It's a book called Garden Seed Inventory, and it is a catalog of every mail order source of open pollinated seed in the United States, and it will explain each variety and its characteristics, and it will help you to make the best selections for heat tolerance and these other things that we mentioned as well. When you write in for your resource sheet, the information on how to order this book will be there as well, and I really highly recommend it. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that this encourages you to get out into the garden. We'll see you again real soon. God bless.